Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. My name is Russell Hunter, and in 1996, I found myself deep in the North Cascades of Washington, chasing down what should have been an easy solo scouting trip for a local land trust. I'm a Lakota Sioux, and after my first couple of jobs in urban forestry, I figured moving westward might offer a little more freedom and open air. For the most part, it's been true. This forest work usually meant spotting different species, tracking growth patterns, and trying not to spook any hikers with a quick glance of me out of the brush. Just your typical boring flora and fauna review, right? Well, I hadn't banked on running into what was waiting out here in the Cascades. The assignment started simply enough. The higher-ups sent me on this one because I didn't mind the cold or the quiet. The only real company I had were the dense trees and moss-covered stones. The further I hiked, the quieter things got. And I'd heard about that unnatural kind of quiet before, thought it was a myth, something meant to keep kids close to their campfires. I started paying more attention to each rustle, every snapped twig. The silence was unnerving, and not the kind you can just shake off. When I reached the western face of the ridge, I started noticing oddities, strange imprints in the mud that looked like they belonged to some sort of mutated elk. But the tracks were too spaced out, too deep, with sharp impressions in the soil, as if something heavy yet agile had leapt across the path. For a second, I thought maybe I was hallucinating from the altitude, but something about the marks felt real and immediate, like I'd interrupted something halfway between here and the tree line. Just as I was about to retrace my steps, I caught sight of something. It darted between the trees, and I only saw it for a flash, a figure that seemed to ripple with the shadows. Built like a moose, but all wrong. Its skin had a strange texture, almost like cracked stone mixed with fur, and every limb seemed elongated, stretched out in ways that made my skin itch just looking at it. I'm no stranger to weird creatures. I've met grizzly bears too curious for their own good, and once saw a cougar in full sprint. But this thing was different. I stood there for a solid minute, staring after where it had disappeared, half convinced I'd imagined it, yet the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I kept moving, trying to tell myself I hadn't just seen what I knew I had. Around dusk, I made my way to a clearing that I'd marked as my campsite. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of damp chill that creeps into your bones. I was rummaging through my pack for a flask when I heard something. A wet, guttural sound, almost like a choke and a gasp rolled into one. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far enough for comfort either. As I crouched low, scanning the edges of the clearing, a loud snap echoed out, and then silence. My pulse hammered, and I kept my flashlight off, listening. In the fading light, I spotted something barely distinguishable against the tree line. 2 legs, long and twisted, just standing there, half visible in the dusk. They were the wrong kind of legs for anything I'd ever seen, long and sinewy, as if they were made of tree roots and sinew. And then the damn thing started moving toward me. It didn't hurry. It just took its time, one step at a time, closing the distance in a sick, deliberate rhythm. I scrambled for my knife, wishing I'd packed something a lot heftier. For a moment I thought about running, but something told me that thing would have no trouble keeping up. It let out a noise again, a wet, dragging sound, like someone trying to clear mud from their throat. Then it made its move. It launched itself forward, those gangly limbs twisting mid-air, stretching out toward me. My brain clicked into survival mode, and I barely ducked out of the way, feeling the rush of air as it passed by, landing hard on the spot where I'd just been standing. The thing adjusted itself and whipped around to face me. Its body seemed to shift and expand in the moonlight, like it was trying to take up more space, to intimidate me with every crackling movement. And there was something unsettling about its face, or lack of one. Where you'd expect eyes, a nose, a mouth, There was only this slick, hollowed-out space, like it had left those behind somewhere, or never needed them in the first place. Yet I felt its focus on me, intense and unwavering. At that point, I couldn't afford to think. I just ran. My boots slapped the wet ground, slipping here and there as I tore through the underbrush, not even caring if it heard me. I could hear it keeping pace, a few strides behind. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of those twisted limbs, moving like some grotesque dance. My only goal was to reach the old ranger outpost a couple of miles ahead. I knew it was sturdy enough to buy me time. As I broke through the dense forest, my foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling into a patch of icy mud. I scrambled to get back up, my hands sinking into the cold earth, as I heard that thing barreling closer. When I finally managed to get up, I turned just in time to see it closing in, looming above me, its twisted body a shadow against the night. Out of sheer desperation, I grabbed a chunk of rock and hurled it at the thing's torso. It didn't react like an animal. Instead, it jerked back as if surprised, giving me a split second to dash forward again, barely clearing its reach. I could see the outline of the ranger outpost ahead, and with everything I had, I sprinted to the door, slamming it behind me and bracing against it with my weight. For a moment, there was silence, just the sound of my own breath and heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then came a scratching, low and rhythmic, just on the other side of the door. The wood creaked under the weight of it, but it held. I could hear it shifting, scuffling around the sides of the cabin, searching for a weak point. And then came the smell, a thick, rancid stench, like decaying leaves mixed with something metallic, seeping through the cracks of the door. I backed up, grabbing anything that could work as a weapon, a chair leg, a rusted fire poker, and held my ground. Hours must have passed. I could still hear it out there, circling the cabin, scratching now and then. The feeling that it was toying with me was almost worse than if it had just broken down the door. I spent the whole night like that, eyes wide open, one hand clenched around that fire poker. By dawn, the scratching had stopped. My muscles were stiff, every nerve frayed, but I forced myself to crack open the door. The clearing was empty, except for those same twisted tracks in the mud, leading back toward the trees. They were fresh, still sharp in the morning light, and I felt a jolt of dread as I traced them with my gaze, wondering just how close I'd come to the end. I didn't stick around to find out if it was gone for good. After reporting back, the Land Trust asked if I wanted a new assignment in a different region. I took it without a second thought, miles away from the North Cascades and the thing I left behind. Months later, I did a bit of research, out of morbid curiosity, trying to find anything that matched what I'd seen. The only thing that came close was an old legend about a creature called the Root Wraith, an entity said to guard the deep forests, twisted and formed from the roots and branches of the oldest trees. My name is Jeremy Harris. I was 39 years old when this happened. If you're reading this, I want you to promise me one thing. Never go into Apalachicola National Forest alone. I had spent years debunking myths, ghosts, witches, urban legends. None of them had ever stood up to scrutiny. My YouTube channel had blown up after I exposed the haunted B.H. Haven Asylum as nothing more than faulty wiring and wind drafts. So when I heard about the Bone Collector, I thought it was just another backwoods boogeyman, a local legend. A few missing hikers turned into something supernatural. I was wrong. I parked my RV deep in the Apalachicola National Forest, just off an overgrown section of the Garden of Eden Trail. The place was deserted, no other campers, no rangers, no noise except for the wind in the pines. Perfect. I set up cameras and motion sensors, tested my thermal imaging, and checked my drone. The goal was simple. 3 nights in the forest investigating the myth. I'd prove the Bone Collector was just a story, upload my footage and rake in the views. But by the second night, I knew something was watching me. It started small, a faint whistle in the distance, slow and deliberate, drifting through the trees. I assumed it was the wind. Then I found the doll. It was outside my RV, carved from wood, no more than 6 inches tall. The detail was unsettling. A tiny backpack, a small camera around its neck. It was me. I scanned the woods, my flashlight cutting through the mist, but there was no one. My cameras hadn't caught a damn thing. The next morning I hiked deeper into the forest. I found an old tent, half rotten and abandoned. Inside there were clothes, a rusted knife, a canteen, but no sign of the owner, just a bone, a human jawbone. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but it wasn't. That night the whistling came back, closer. I set up infrared cameras around my RV. If someone was screwing with me, I'd catch them. But at 3:12 a.m. my motion sensor beeped. Someone was standing outside my RV. I grabbed my knife and checked the monitor. Black and white static. My expensive night vision cam was glitching out, but for a split second I saw something. A figure in rags standing just outside the frame, motionless, watching. I burst out with my flashlight, heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees and fog. But when I turned around, another doll sat at my RV's door. This one had its eyes gouged out. I should have left. I should have packed up and sped the hell out of there. But my ego told me to stay. I paid the price. The next morning my tires were slashed. Deep, deliberate cuts. My keys were gone. I searched for them for hours, but it was like they'd vanished. With no choice, I started hiking toward the main road. My GPS was acting up. My compass spun uselessly. Then I saw it. A cabin, half hidden in the trees. Old. Rotting. I knew the story. Said the bone collector had a workshop deep in the woods. I told myself it was just an old hunter's shack. But inside I found bones. Piles of them, stripped clean and arranged in strange patterns. Some looked human. The walls were covered in dolls, all carved from wood, all missing their eyes. My breath caught as I saw a fresh one, a perfect match for my face. Then I heard the whistling. It was inside the cabin. I turned, knife drawn, heart pounding. Something slammed into me from the dark, knocking me onto the dirt floor. Rough hands gripped my throat, pressing me down. I kicked, struggled, feeling cold breath on my face. Then everything went black. I woke up tied to a chair, my wrists bound with old rope. The cabin was silent, except for the sound of something moving in the dark corner of the room. A man, or what used to be a man, stepped into the dim light. His face was hidden behind a burlap mask, stitched together with thick black thread. His clothes were ragged, caked in dirt and dried blood. "The bones talk," he whispered, his voice like a rusted blade scraping metal. "They tell me who stays and who leaves." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. He stepped closer, tilting his head, examining me, studying. I saw the knife in his belt. My pulse roared in my ears. "The forest takes what it's owed," he murmured. The others, they didn't listen. I forced myself to breathe, think, plan. Then I saw it, the rusted blade on the floor, half hidden beneath a pile of bones. He turned away for a moment, humming that damn tune. I lunged, kicking my chair forward, grabbing the blade with my bound hands. He turned, too slow. I drove the rusted metal into his thigh. His scream was inhuman. I ran, bursting through the door, sprinting into the woods. The trees blurred around me. My lungs burned. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and then headlights. A truck just ahead. A hunter stood by the driver's side, rifle slung over his shoulder. I stumbled toward him, gasping. "Help, please." The hunter looked at me, expressionless, calm. Then I saw the wooden dolls hanging from his rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. The hunter whistled, the same tune. I barely had time to scream before something struck me from behind. Darkness. Weeks later, a new hiker found a wooden doll on the forest floor. It was me, smiling, waiting. My name is Brian Patel, and back in 2020 I took my old RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. I've always fancied myself a bit of an adventurer, even though the closest I've come to roughing it is microwaving day-old pizza. After years stuck behind a desk crunching numbers, I decided it was time to embrace the great outdoors. I figured, what better way to reconnect with nature than by parking my home on wheels in the middle of a national park? Plus, if things got too wild, I'd still have Wi-Fi and a comfy bed. I arrived at the park on a crisp September morning. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of solitude. As I navigated my RV through the winding roads, I couldn't help but marvel at the towering mountains and the glacial lakes that mirrored the sky. It was a far cry from the concrete jungle I was used to. I settled into a secluded spot near Lake McDonald. There were a few other campers nearby, a retired couple named Harold and Mabel, and a solo hiker named Lucy, who seemed more comfortable with a backpack than I was with my RV's GPS system. "First time here?" Harold asked as I awkwardly hooked up my RV's utilities. "Is it that obvious?" I chuckled. "Just a bit," Mabel smiled. "Don't worry, everyone starts somewhere." Over the next couple of days, I got to know my neighbors. Harold was a former engineer who retired early to travel the country. Mabel was an artist, capturing landscapes with watercolors that seemed to bring them to life. Lucy was a wildlife photographer, chasing after creatures most people only see on postcards. One evening, we all gathered around a campfire. The sky was a tapestry of stars, and the crackling fire provided a cozy warmth against the chilly air. "You ever hear about the park's hidden trails?" Lucy asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Hidden trails," I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like the start of a bad horror movie." "Or a good adventure," she retorted. "There's one that leads to an old ranger station, abandoned for years." "Why was it abandoned?" Harold inquired. "Rumor has it there was an incident." Lucy lowered her voice for dramatic effect. "A ranger went missing, and they never found him." "Well, that's not ominous at all," I quipped. "Maybe he just got lost trying to find a decent cell signal." We all laughed, but there was an undercurrent of intrigue. Despite my better judgment, I felt drawn to the idea of exploring the unknown. After all, wasn't that why I came here? The next morning, Lucy convinced me to join her on a hike to find the old ranger station. Harold and Mabel opted out, choosing the comfort of their RV and a good book. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we set off. "I'm not exactly Bear Grylls." "You'll be fine," Lucy assured me. "Besides, I've got a map and a compass. What could go wrong?" "Famous last words," I muttered, but followed her anyway. We trekked through dense forests, the canopy above filtering the sunlight into a mosaic of shadows. The trail was faint, overgrown with shrubs and tangled roots that threatened to trip me at every step. "You know," I said, trying to catch my breath, "I thought off the beaten path was just a figure of speech." Lucy laughed. "Consider this a crash course in wilderness survival." "Great. Does that come with a certificate? Or at least a t-shirt that says, 'I survived getting lost in the woods'?" After a couple of hours, we reached a clearing where the remains of the old ranger station stood. It was a dilapidated wooden structure, windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. "Charming," I remarked. "Looks like the perfect fixer-upper." Lucy began snapping photos. "There's beauty in decay, don't you think?" "I'll take your word for it." As we explored the interior, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, circles intersected by jagged lines, accompanied by words in a language I didn't recognize. "Any idea what this says?" I asked. Lucy shook her head. "Probably just graffiti from other hikers." "Yeah, hikers who carry chisels and have a flair for the dramatic." We heard a rustling outside. I peered through the broken window but saw nothing. "Probably just the wind," Lucy said, though her voice wavered. "Right, the wind in the form of footsteps." She gave me a nervous smile. "Maybe we should head back. Best idea you've had all day." We stepped outside, and that's when we saw him. A man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair that framed a face smudged with dirt. His clothes were tattered, hanging loosely on his thin frame. "Hello there," Lucy called out, ever the friendly explorer. The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head, observing us like a predator sizing up its prey. "Maybe he needs help," I whispered. "Or maybe he's admiring your fashion sense," she whispered back. "Cargo shorts are all the rage in the wilderness." "Ha ha," I muttered. "Let's just keep moving." We started walking away, but the man mirrored our movements, maintaining the same distance. "Okay, this is creepy," I admitted. Agreed, Lucy said, her pace quickening. We veered off the path, hoping to lose him in the thick underbrush. Branches scratched at our arms, and the uneven ground made every step a gamble. "Do you even know where we're going?" I asked. "Back to the main trail, I think." "You think?" "Got a better idea?" A sudden scream cut through the air. It was Lucy. I turned to see the man had grabbed her, his bony fingers digging into her shoulder. Without thinking, I picked up a fallen branch and swung it at him. "Let her go!" I shouted. The branch connected with his back, but he barely flinched. His eyes met mine, cold, devoid of any humanity. He shoved Lucy to the ground and lunged at me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, and before I could react he was above me, a rusted knife gleaming in his hand. "Wait!" I managed to gasp. "We don't want any trouble." He brought the knife down, slicing my arm as I tried to shield myself. Pain shot through me, sharp and searing. "Funny, I always thought getting stabbed would hurt less," I blurted out, adrenaline fueling my sarcasm. "Now's not the time for jokes." Lucy shouted, scrambling to her feet. She threw a rock, hitting the man square in the temple. He grunted, momentarily disoriented. "Run!" she yelled. We bolted through the forest, branches whipping against our faces. My arm throbbed, blood seeping through my fingers. We reached the riverbank, a steep drop leading to rushing waters below. "Great," I panted. "Now what? We grow wings?" "There's a narrow path along the edge," Lucy pointed. "You've got to be kidding." "Do you trust me?" "About as much as I trust gas station sushi, but lead the way." We edged along the cliffside, the river roaring beneath us. Midway across, I felt the ledge crumble slightly under my foot. "Careful," Lucy warned. "No kidding," I muttered. When we finally reached the other side, I thought we were safe, until I saw him standing ahead of us. "How? Does this guy have a twin?" I asked, my heart sinking. He moved toward us, knife in hand. There was no escape. "Stay behind me," I told Lucy. "Don't be a hero," she protested. "Trust me, heroics aren't my style. I just have a plan." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small canister, bear spray. "Always prepared," I said with a weak smile. "Now you tell me you have that?" Better late than never. As he closed in, I aimed and unleashed a cloud of the repellent. He screamed, dropping the knife to claw at his eyes. "Run!" We dashed past him, heading back toward the campsite. The adrenaline blurred the passage of time. All I knew was that we had to keep moving. When we finally broke through the tree line, the sight of Harold and Mabel's RV was like seeing the gates of heaven. "Help!" Lucy shouted. Harold emerged, startled. "What on earth happened?" "No time to explain," I said, gasping for breath. "Call the Rangers." We huddled inside their RV, locking the doors. I sank into a chair, my arm throbbing. "You're bleeding!" Mabel exclaimed, grabbing a first aid kit. "Yeah, turns out nature doesn't agree with me," I tried to joke, wincing as she cleaned the wound. Harold was on the radio, frantically trying to reach park authorities. Minutes later, which felt like hours, we saw the flashing lights of a ranger's vehicle. Officer Daniels stepped out, a stern look on his face. "Can someone tell me what's going on?" We recounted the events, describing the man who attacked us. "Did he say anything?" Daniels asked. "Not a word," I replied, but he wasn't exactly the chatty type. "We'll conduct a search," he assured us. As the Rangers combed the area, we stayed close to the campsite. The atmosphere was tense, the serenity of the park shattered. By nightfall, Daniels returned. We found signs of someone living in the old ranger station, supplies, makeshift bedding, but no sign of the individual described. "Great," I sighed. "So he's still out there?" "We'll keep patrols active," he said. "In the meantime, I suggest you stay within the main areas of the park. Believe me, I've had enough adventure for a lifetime." That night, sleep was elusive. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I sat outside my RV, a flashlight in one hand and the bear spray in the other. Lucy joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" "Not exactly the restful getaway I planned," I admitted. "At least you have a story to tell," she offered. "Yeah, what I did on my vacation. Got stabbed by a lunatic. Real crowd pleaser." she chuckled softly. "You handled yourself well back there. Thanks, though next time I'll stick to stories around the campfire." Morning brought a semblance of normalcy. Campers went about their routines, seemingly unaware of the danger lurking in the woods. As I packed up my RV, preparing to leave, Harold approached me. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. "Yeah, I think I've overstayed my welcome with Mother Nature." "Can't blame you," he nodded, "but don't let one bad experience keep you from exploring." "I'll keep that in mind. Maybe next time I'll try a beach." He laughed. "Less bears, more sharks." As I drove out of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that man? Why did he attack us? A few days later, I did some digging online. News articles from years ago mentioned a ranger who went missing, Thomas Reed. Rumors suggested he had gone rogue after a personal tragedy, losing his family in an accident. The final line of an old report caught my eye. Authorities believe Reed may still be in the area, living off the grid, his mental state deteriorated. So that was it, a broken man, lost in his own wilderness. I was on my way to visit some friends up north, but didn't feel like paying for a campground for just a one-night stop. I'd seen this old gas station from the highway earlier that day. It looked pretty run down, probably abandoned for years, but it had a big, empty lot, and I figured it'd be a perfect, quiet place to park for the night. I'd save some money and avoid the hassle of a campsite. It was around 9 p.m. when I pulled off the highway and parked my RV near one of the rusted pumps. The place was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the little convenience store attached to the station had broken windows and a boarded-up door. The only lights were from my RV and the occasional flickering of street lamps along the highway. I made sure to lock all the doors and checked the windows just to be safe. There was no real reason to be scared, but something about the place felt off. Maybe it was the fact that there was no one around, no cars, no lights, nothing for miles. I set up camp, made myself some dinner, and then let Charlie out for a walk around the parking lot. It was calm, too calm. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every now and then, I'd glance up at the boarded-up gas station and wonder who had worked there in the past. Why had they just left? I brushed off the thought and settled in for the night, locking up Charlie and myself inside the RV. The only thing left was to relax with a movie and try to get some sleep. I don't know what woke me up. It was around 3 a.m. when I was jolted out of sleep. At first I thought I had just dreamt something strange, but then I heard it again. A loud knock on the RV door. It was heavy, like someone was pounding on it with their fist. My heart raced, and I sat up immediately, staring at the door in the dark. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Who is it?" Nothing. I waited for a response, but there was only silence for a few moments before the pounding came again, this time faster and more frantic. I glanced over at Charlie, who was lying at my feet. He didn't even move. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound. That's when I started to feel like something was really off. Why wasn't he reacting? I leaned closer to the door, staring through the small window, but I couldn't see anyone. I debated whether to open it. Part of me thought maybe it was someone stranded or in trouble, but I'd heard enough stories about people being lured into bad situations. My gut told me something was wrong, but I still hesitated. Then the pounding started again, louder this time, followed by a voice. A man's voice. It was panicked, and I could barely make out what he was saying. "Help! Please! They're after me!" the man shouted. "Please! Open up! Please!" I froze. I hadn't seen anyone else when I parked, and this guy sounded desperate, terrified even. I looked through the window again, but I still didn't see anyone. My gut told me something was wrong, but I couldn't ignore the sound of someone in distress. I figured I could at least crack the door open just a little to see what was going on. I cracked the door just a few inches. "Who are you? What's going on?" I asked, my voice still shaky. The man's voice sounded even more urgent now. They're going to hurt me. Please, just let me in. I felt a little bad at that point. I was alone in the middle of nowhere with only my dog for company. What if this guy was being chased? What if he was telling the truth? My hand hovered near the door, and I started to pull it open just enough to give him a glimpse of my face. Then, out of nowhere, Charlie let out a low growl, followed by a series of loud barks. I jumped back, startled, and looked around. Charlie was now on his feet, looking out the side window with his hackles raised. That was enough to make me pause. Hey, calm down, Charlie, I whispered, trying to settle him. But I could tell he wasn't having it. Something wasn't right. I was starting to regret even opening the door this much. Just as I was about to shut it, I saw a shadow move from behind the gas station, a figure slipping into view. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just someone walking by. But then I saw another shadow, and then another. They were closing in. I slammed the door shut just as I saw a group of men step out of the shadows, walking slowly toward the RV. Panic surged through me. My hands shook as I locked the door and threw the deadbolt. I grabbed my phone, but before I could dial, the pounding started once more. But this time it wasn't just one person. There were knocks all around the RV, one on the front, one on the side, and I even heard footsteps on the roof. I turned off the lights, crouched down by the window and listened. They were circling my RV. The man outside kept shouting for help, but now his voice sounded different, more controlled, almost rehearsed. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't figure out what. The minutes felt like hours. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay in there all night, and I couldn't leave either. Then, out of nowhere, the knocking stopped. Complete silence. I felt like I could breathe again, but I wasn't foolish enough to think it was over. I stayed crouched, trying to make sense of what was happening. A few more minutes passed, and then suddenly there was a soft, almost inaudible scratching on the door. I didn't dare move. That's when I heard the distinct sound of someone shuffling back to the gas station. I peeked out the side window again, and this time I saw it. 2 figures walking away from the RV. They didn't seem to be in any kind of rush. No one was running. They were just walking casually back toward the shadows like nothing had happened. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random guy in trouble. This was a setup. They had been trying to lure me out of the RV. They wanted me to open the door so they could rob me, or worse. My heart was still racing, but I stayed inside, not daring to make a move until morning. When the sun finally started to rise, I didn't wait around to see if they would return. I packed up as quickly as I could and got the hell out of there. I never found out who those men were, but I'm sure of one thing. I'm never parking at an abandoned gas station again. My name is Sean Walker, and what I am about to share happened in 1980 on the Zuni Indian Reservation in New Mexico. I remember that day so clearly because I had just started dating a nurse from the tribal clinic who swore my attempts at making fry bread tasted like something our old crow dog might have cooked if it had thumbs. I took her comment as both a challenge and a compliment. I had spent the morning carving small wooden figurines behind my grandfather's old adobe house, a place tucked at the edge of a dry field, where a thin line of scaly brush marked the border of our neighbor's grazing land. I was trying to carve a small figure of a horned toad for my nurse friend, maybe a peace offering to make up for my cooking. I remember working slowly, listening to the quiet hum of the wind. Not many people visited those parts, aside from a few families who preferred the outskirts of the main village. I was wearing a faded denim jacket, my best pair of boots, and feeling smug about my carving. That's when Tahi came running up the dirt path. He reached me out of breath, sweat above his eyebrows. He said something about an odd set of tracks behind the cattle pens. At first, I shrugged. Folks often saw strange prints out here, sometimes stray dogs, sometimes a half-starved mountain lion passing through. But Tahi wasn't laughing this time. He said, "You got to see this." and I noticed his hands shaking. For a moment I considered teasing him, maybe a quick one-liner, something like, "If I'm going to follow you, I should at least get hazard pay." But his eyes were too serious, so I got up and followed him along the dusty trail. We walked about 100 yards south until we reached a fenced enclosure where Mr. Ortiz's 3 cows usually grazed. 2 of the cows stood nervously in one corner, eyes wide, their hooves grinding up the dirt as if they wanted to bolt but didn't know where. The 3rd one lay on its side, stiff, blood along its flank. I took a few slow steps closer. Its throat had been torn open by something sharp. The wound looked clean, not like the ragged work of coyotes. I thought maybe a large cat, but the tracks around the cow didn't look right. They were large prints, 3-toed, as if some heavy creature balanced on powerful hind legs. The size reminded me of a mountain lion's paw, but elongated, distorted. I swallowed hard and said, "Remind me never to complain about my love life again, Tahi, because this day just beat it by a mile." We hurried toward the village. I told the first person we saw, an older neighbor named Atto, to call the tribal police. I didn't own a gun, never liked them much. Frankly, I had always been the kind of man who figured if I needed to hunt, I'd borrow a rifle from my cousin, or just stick to carving figurines instead. But with something like this around, I felt naked. I decided to talk to my uncle Ruckin, who kept an old rifle for emergencies. While I did that, the tribal officer Marto came over to examine the dead cow. We ended up gathering behind my grandfather's place. The afternoon air felt oddly quiet, as though the wind had stepped back, waiting for something else to happen. Marto said he'd never seen anything like these wounds. He joked, "Maybe I should charge admission and call this a twisted petting zoo," which got a dry laugh out of me. I fired back, "Charge by the pound, officer, but I don't think folks want a souvenir." If the humor felt forced, it still made the fear more manageable. We discussed possibilities. A mountain lion crossed with a coyote, a diseased wolf, something escaped from a private enclosure. Nothing added up. We decided to track it before dusk. Nobody felt comfortable waiting. The reservation was quiet, and we wanted to keep it that way. The idea of a strange predator loose among our homes didn't sit well with anyone. A few of us headed out, me holding my uncle's rifle awkwardly, Mato armed with his service revolver, and 2 other men, Ku and Misra, each carrying shotguns. We followed a trail of disturbed brush and occasional spatters of blood leading away from Ortiz's field and down a gentle slope toward the creek bed. I was not a skilled tracker, but Mato pointed out bent twigs, crushed grasses, and impressions in the soft earth. We walked slowly. I could smell juniper on the breeze. Halfway down the slope we found something else. A scrap of faded cloth stuck to a low branch and small tufts of dark matted fur. The fur smelled pungent, a foul scent that reminded me of a sick fox I once found, though heavier and muskier. Mato held it to his nose and grimaced. "Smells worse than my brother's jokes," he said. I replied, "At least your brother's jokes don't leave footprints." A small attempt at humor, but I felt my heart pounding and sweat rolled down my back. The others didn't respond. We moved on. As we reached the creek bed, the sun dipped lower. The light sharpened, turning the brush into silhouettes. We rounded a cluster of rocks. That's when we saw it. It stood partially hidden in a stand of willow shrubs, hunched forward. Its outline reminded me of a giant lynx, twisted upright, shoulders too broad, ears tufted but oddly shaped, snout elongated, and jaws that seemed capable of crushing bone. The creature's limbs were powerful and thick, its hind legs bent like those of a kangaroo, giving it that strange gait. It moved slowly and deliberately, rustling the dry leaves. I lowered my rifle and tried to aim, but my hands shook. Mato whispered, "Easy." We stepped closer. Without warning, it rushed us. I fired once, missed. Mato's shot went wide. The creature slammed into Misra before he could react. I heard a choking gasp, the sound of flesh tearing. Ku screamed and fired at point-blank range, but the creature swatted at him, knocking him off his feet. I stumbled backward and tried to steady my aim. The beast stood over Misra's body, then whipped its head around toward me. In that moment I caught a full view of its face. Angular cheekbones, yellow eyes, a mouth lined with teeth that made me think of a jaguar. It didn't roar or hiss. It only breathed, fast and heavy, nostrils flaring, as if it had no need to announce itself. We tried to form a semicircle, but the terrain was uneven. Marteau shouted, "Ku, get behind that rock!" Ku limped away, trailing blood from a deep scratch on his arm. I exhaled and fired again. The shot grazed the creature's shoulder, making it jerk its head. Marteau managed to hit it in the side, and it staggered. We advanced carefully. The creature retreated a few steps, dragging one leg slightly as if wounded. Misra lay unmoving behind it, his chest torn open. I wished I could unsee that. Ku pressed a rag against his arm. Marteau checked his ammunition. I clutched the rifle so hard my knuckles hurt. We encircled the thing. It crouched low, muscles tensed, eyes on us. It sprang forward. I fired twice. The first bullet missed, the second hit its chest. It stumbled. Marteau fired a precise shot. The creature dropped, struggling to rise, but its legs twitched uselessly. I stepped closer and aimed at its head, my finger trembling on the trigger. It looked at me with something I can only call pure animal intensity. Marteau fired once more. The creature stopped moving. We stared at the body. Its shape still didn't make sense. By morning, we buried it deep, far from the village. There would be stories and rumors, but in the end it was just a wild, unknown animal, one that had challenged us, and we fought back, leaving no loose ends behind. I'm Terry Mason Montrose, and back in 2018, I took my RV to Great Basin National Park in Nevada. After 2 decades of crunching numbers as an accountant, I figured it was time to trade spreadsheets for open roads and see if nature's Wi-Fi password was easier to crack than my own. I rolled into the park just as the sun dipped behind Wheeler Peak, casting long shadows across the sagebrush. Setting up camp was a comedy of errors. I nearly mistook a jackrabbit for a rock and almost backed the RV into a cactus. "Great start, Calvin," I muttered. "At this rate, the wildlife will file a restraining order." Once settled, I decided to explore the area. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. As I walked, I came across another camper struggling to pitch a tent that looked like it had more poles than a political campaign. "Need a hand?" I called out. He turned, a grin spreading across his face. "Wouldn't say no to it. Name's Hank." "Terry," I replied, joining him. "First time wrestling with nylon," he chuckled. "You could say that. Thought I'd save some money and skip the hotel, starting to think I overestimated my outdoorsiness." "Don't worry," I said, grabbing a corner of the tent. "Between the two of us, we might make one competent camper." We managed to get the tent standing, albeit lopsided, and sat down to share a beer. Hank was a teacher from Idaho, taking a break before the new school year. We swapped stories, laughing about our mutual lack of survival skills. "So what brings you out here?" he asked. "Figured I'd see what all the fuss is about with this nature thing," I said. "Plus, my doctor said I should reduce stress. Thought I'd trade my office chair for a camp chair." "Bold move," Hank replied. "Most people just take up yoga. Have you seen me try to touch my toes? It's not pretty." As night fell, we parted ways, agreeing to meet up for a hike the next morning. Back at my RV, I gazed up at the stars, more than I'd ever seen back home. It was humbling, like looking at the universe's own connect-the-dots puzzle. The next day, Hank and I set off on a trail that was supposedly moderate, but felt more like an audition for a survival show. "If we find a convenience store up here, I'm buying us lottery tickets," I joked. "Deal," Hank laughed, "though I wouldn't hold your breath." About an hour in, we stumbled upon an old mine entrance, boarded up with warning signs plastered all over. "Do not enter. Danger." And my personal favorite, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." "Subtle," Hank commented. "Yeah, it's like they don't want us to have any fun," I replied, "though I'm not keen on meeting any bats today." We continued on, but something felt off. The forest was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes you check if you've accidentally muted the world. "Notice how quiet it is?" I asked. Hank nodded. Maybe the animals are social distancing. At least someone is, I said. We pressed on, but the uneasy feeling grew. Suddenly a man emerged from the trees ahead. He was tall and lean, with scraggly hair and clothes that looked like they'd lost a fight with a bear. A rifle was slung over his shoulder. "Afternoon," he said, his voice flat. "Hey there," Hank replied. "Didn't expect to see anyone else out here." "Not many do," the man said, his eyes scanning us. "You folks should turn back. Trail's closed ahead." I frowned. We didn't see any signs. He shrugged. "Must have missed them. Best head back." "All right," Hank said slowly. "Thanks for the heads up." As we turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Friendly guy," I whispered. "Yeah, about as friendly as a tax audit," Hank replied. We decided to cut the hike short and headed back toward camp. Along the way, we noticed tracks on the ground. Not animal tracks, but deep grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged. "Maybe someone lost their luggage," I suggested weakly. "With our luck, probably," Hank said. Back at camp, we found our sights had been rummaged through. My RV door was ajar and Hank's tent had been slashed. "What the hell?" I exclaimed, rushing to check my belongings. Oddly, nothing seemed to be missing. "This doesn't feel like a random animal," Hank said, his expression grim. "Agreed, I think our friend from the trail might be involved." We decided to report the incident to the park ranger. At the station, we found Ranger Martinez sipping coffee and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Afternoon, folks. What can I do for you?" We explained the situation, but he seemed unconcerned. "Probably just some teenagers playing pranks," he said. "Happens more often than you'd think." "Teenagers with rifles?" I asked skeptically. He shrugged. "Second Amendment, buddy. Look, I'll make a note of it, but there's not much we can do unless something's been stolen." "Great," Hank muttered as we left. "We get the one ranger auditioning for most apathetic employee." "At least he didn't offer us a hang-in-there poster," I said. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight, a noise outside jolted me awake, a metallic clang followed by footsteps. Peering through the window, I saw the man from earlier rifling through Hank's tent. I grabbed my flashlight and, against my better judgment, stepped outside. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" He looked up, his expression cold. "Should have left when you had the chance," he said. Before I could react, he raised his rifle and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed, and I ducked behind the RV. "Not exactly a welcoming committee," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. From the corner of my eye, I saw Hank emerge from the darkness, holding a large branch. He crept up behind the man and swung, striking him across the back. The man stumbled but didn't go down. He turned and fired at Hank, the bullet grazing his arm. "Ah!" Hank cried out, clutching his wound. Rage and fear surged through me. Spotting a heavy wrench on the ground, I lunged at the man. We grappled, and he swung the rifle, hitting me in the ribs. Pain shot through my side, but I held on, using the wrench to knock the weapon from his hands. "You're messing with the wrong campers," I yelled. He sneered. "You city slickers think you own everything." "Well, I did overpay for this RV," I retorted. He pulled a knife from his belt and slashed at me, the blade narrowly missing my face. Hank, despite his injury, tackled him from behind. The three of us tumbled to the ground in a chaotic struggle. In the scuffle, the man managed to stab Hank in the chest. Blood spread across his shirt as he collapsed. "No," I shouted, adrenaline fueling me. I swung the wrench again, this time connecting with the man's head. He fell back, stunned. Seizing the moment, I grabbed the rifle and aimed it at him. "Stay down." He laughed darkly. "You don't have the guts." "Try me," I said, my hand shaking. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the gunshots. The man realized his time was up and bolted into the woods. I dropped the rifle and rushed to Hank's side. His breathing was shallow. "Hang on, buddy," I said, applying pressure to the wound. "Help's on the way." "Terry," he whispered. "Guess camping wasn't such a great idea after all." "Don't say that," I replied, forcing a smile. "Next time we'll stick to yoga." He managed a weak chuckle, then his eyes closed. Hank was gone. The police scoured the area but found no sign of the attacker. They took my statement, and I provided as much detail as I could. Back at the station, Detective Susan Hayes approached me. "Mr. Montrose, I'm sorry for your loss," she said sincerely. "Thank you," I replied hollowly. "We have reason to believe the man you encountered is Daniel Harper," she continued, "a local with a history of violent behavior. He's been living off the grid after several run-ins with the law." "Why wasn't he already in custody?" I asked, anger bubbling up. She sighed. "Limited resources, jurisdictional issues, but we'll do everything we can to find him." Over the next few days, I assisted the authorities in their search. They discovered Harper's makeshift camps deep in the woods, along with stolen items from various campers and a shallow grave containing 2 bodies. The realization that Hank wasn't his only victim hit me hard. Harper had been preying on unsuspecting campers, using the vastness of the park to his advantage. Eventually, they caught him trying to flee the state. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. In the final report, it was revealed that Daniel Harper had a warped sense of territoriality, believing that the park belonged to him alone. Anyone who entered was a threat to be eliminated. With Harper behind bars, I left Nevada carrying the weight of what had happened, but knowing that justice had been served. I've always hated early mornings, not the ones where you get a good breakfast and head into the office, but the ones where you're out in the middle of nowhere, sipping coffee that tastes like dirt and pretending you aren't waiting for something bad to happen. It was in 2002, during one of those mornings, that I found myself in a remote section of New Hampshire, the White Mountains, to be exact. Name's Derek Hemsworth. I'm a park ranger here, and today I was partnered up with this guy, Pete, one of those old-timers who thinks coffee is breakfast. If I had a nickel for every time Pete started a sentence with, "back in my day," I'd be richer than the guy who invented that trendy camping gear everyone buys but never uses. We'd been sent to check out a part of the forest that hadn't been maintained in years. It wasn't on any maps, at least not the new ones. Some hikers had gone missing a few weeks ago. Authorities found their campsite trashed, but no sign of the people. A typical Tuesday, right? Pete and I were cracking jokes as we hiked in, the kind of jokes that probably wouldn't go over well in a crowded room, but when you're stuck out here, dark humor keeps you sane. Pete's classic, "If you get lost, just find a bear, let it maul you a little, and someone will surely find the body." Not the kind of joke you share at a family dinner, but it got a laugh from me. We didn't think much about the missing hikers because, honestly, people get lost out here all the time. But about an hour into the trail, the light chatter between us died down. Pete, despite his joking nature, was a tracker. He noticed things I didn't, like the way the trees here seemed too close together or how the ground was unnaturally soft underfoot. It was like walking on a sponge. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Pete stopped and looked at me, then squatted to get a closer look at something on the ground. I walked over, trying to see what had him so interested. It was a footprint, but not a normal one. At first glance it looked like a bear's, but something was off. The toes were too long and the shape wasn't right. It was almost like a hand, but bigger. Much bigger. I remember Pete standing up, his face losing its usual smirk. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. We kept walking, not saying much. Every once in a while Pete would stop, look around, and then keep going. The woods felt wrong, like being in a place the world had forgotten. No paths, no signs of life, just dense trees and that soft, squishy ground. Then we came across the campsite, or what was left of it. The tent had been torn apart, sleeping bags shredded like someone had taken a knife to them. I looked at Pete, but he was focused on something else, a smell. It wasn't the kind of smell you associate with a campfire or old food left out. This was different. It was metallic, almost like rust mixed with something rotting. Pete walked around the site, his usual slow, deliberate movements. I stayed back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I noticed something odd. The trees had scratches on them, deep gouges like something with claws had been here. But bears don't scratch like that. At least, not in this part of the country. I glanced back at Pete. He was gone. For a second I thought he had just wandered off, maybe following the trail of whatever made those marks. But then I saw his hat lying on the ground. I called out to him, my voice cracking a little. Nothing. Not even the wind answered. I ran toward where I last saw him, my heart pounding in my chest. I was met with silence. No birds, no animals, not even Pete's voice. Just me, standing in a dead forest, staring at the empty space where Pete had been. I'm not proud of it, but I panicked. I turned and started running back the way we came. My mind was racing. It didn't make sense. Pete couldn't just disappear like that. But as I ran, I realized something. The ground beneath my feet was different. It wasn't the soft, sponge-like ground we'd been walking on. It was firmer, more solid. And then I saw them. Bones, scattered across the forest floor, half buried in the dirt. Some of them looked human, but others, well, I don't know what they were. I stumbled back, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound, like something breathing through mud. I scrambled to my feet, looking around, but I couldn't see anything. The trees were too close together, blocking my view in every direction. I'm not ashamed to admit that I ran. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to meet it. But as I ran, the sounds got louder. Footsteps, heavy and fast, crashing through the underbrush behind me. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, dodging trees and jumping over fallen logs. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I burst out of the trees and onto an old logging road. I collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for air, my legs burning from the effort. I lay there for a while, trying to catch my breath. But the sound didn't stop. It was still coming, and it was getting closer. That's when I saw it. It stepped out of the trees, just at the edge of the road. At first I thought it was a bear, but it wasn't. It was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, its body covered in thick, matted fur. But the worst part was its face. It looked like someone had taken a bear and stretched its features, pulling them into something grotesque and unnatural. Its teeth were long, jagged, and wet with something that glistened in the dim light. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I pushed myself to my feet and ran down the road, not caring where it led. I just knew I had to get away from that thing. Eventually, I found an old cabin, probably left behind by one of the loggers years ago. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me. The cabin was old, falling apart in places, but it was sturdy enough. I barricaded the door with a chair and a few pieces of broken furniture, then crouched down in the corner, listening. For a while there was nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the creaking of the old wood. Then it came. I heard it outside, moving around the cabin, sniffing the air, like it was trying to find a way in. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. The walls shook as it scratched at the door, testing the strength of the wood. I wasn't armed. I don't carry a gun when I'm out here. We're not supposed to. Anyway, this was supposed to be a safe area. Safe? What a joke. It stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe it had given up. But then the door exploded inward, sending splinters flying across the room. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an old fire poker, and swung it as the thing charged at me. It didn't seem to care. It barreled into me, knocking me to the ground, its teeth snapping inches from my face. I shoved the poker into its side, but it barely reacted. I could feel its hot, rancid breath on my skin as it tried to bite down on me. Somehow I managed to roll out from under it, scrambling to my feet. The thing lunged at me again, but I ducked, grabbing a broken chair and smashing it over its back. It let out a sound, something between a grunt and a snarl, and turned to face me. I didn't wait for it to attack again. I ran. The ranger station didn't believe me at first, but they couldn't ignore the evidence. Pete's remains, the missing hikers. The wrecked cabin. They never found the creature, but I know it's still out there, waiting, and I'm done. My name is Sean Walker, and what I'm about to tell you happened back in 1996. I used to live in a small town in Oregon, not far from the coast. I was just an average guy, working as a mechanic during the day and spending most of my evenings at the local bar with my friends. My life was simple, and I liked it that way. I had a good group of friends, and we often spent our weekends hiking and camping in the nearby woods. One weekend, we decided to go camping in a place called Devil's Knob, a secluded spot that few people knew about. It was a beautiful area with dense forests and a crystal-clear river running through it. The place had an eerie name, but we never thought much of it. It was just a name, after all. We set up our camp in a small clearing near the river. There were 4 of us: me, Tom, Jack, and Pete. Tom was the outdoorsy type, always dragging us to remote places like this. Jack was the jokester, never missing an opportunity to make us laugh. Pete was the quiet one, but he was solid and reliable. We spent the first day hiking and fishing, and by evening we were sitting around the campfire laughing and telling stories. Tom, of course, started with his usual ghost stories. He had a knack for making them sound real, but we all knew they were just stories. That night, though, there was something different in the air. As Tom spoke, the woods seemed to grow quieter, almost as if they were listening. "You know," Tom said, his voice low and serious, "they say there's a creature that roams these woods, a werewolf or something like it. It comes out when the moon is full, hunting for its next victim." "Come on, Tom," Jack laughed. "You really expect us to believe that?" "I'm serious," Tom insisted. "People have gone missing around here. They find their bodies days later, torn apart. Some say it's just a wild animal, but others believe it's something else." Pete shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should change the subject," he suggested. Fine, Tom said, raising his hands in surrender. "Just trying to set the mood." We laughed it off and continued with our evening. Eventually we all crawled into our tents, tired from the day's activities. I fell asleep quickly, but my sleep was restless. I kept hearing strange noises outside, branches snapping and leaves rustling. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down I felt uneasy. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud scream. It was Jack. I scrambled out of my tent, my heart pounding. The campfire had burned down to embers, casting a dim glow over the clearing. Jack was standing near the edge of the woods, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" I shouted, running to his side. I saw something," he stammered, pointing into the trees. "It was huge, and it had glowing eyes." Tom and Pete were awake now too, looking just as scared as I felt. We grabbed our flashlights and shone them into the trees, but there was nothing there. "Probably just a deer or something," Tom said, though he didn't sound convinced. We tried to go back to sleep, but none of us really could. Every noise seemed amplified, every shadow more menacing. We stayed close together, our flashlights within reach. The next day we decided to cut our trip short. The fun had been sucked out of it, and we all wanted to go home. We packed up our gear and started the long hike back to the car. The woods felt different, more oppressive. We didn't talk much, just kept our heads down and walked. As we neared the car, we heard it again, a low, guttural noise that sent chills down my spine. We froze, looking around frantically. "There it is!" Jack yelled, pointing to a spot in the trees. I saw it too, a massive figure moving silently through the underbrush. It was tall, with broad shoulders and long, muscular limbs. Its eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, and its face was that of a wolf, twisted into a snarl. "Run!" Tom shouted, and we bolted for the car. We could hear it crashing through the woods behind us, getting closer with every step. I could feel its breath on my neck, smell its rank odor. My legs were burning, but I pushed myself harder, desperate to reach the safety of the car. We made it, slamming the door shut just as the creature reached us. It hit the side of the car with a force that rocked us, its claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. Tom floored the gas pedal, and we sped away, the creature chasing us for a few hundred yards before disappearing back into the woods. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away. We didn't talk, just sat in stunned silence. When we finally reached civilization, we went straight to the police. They listened to our story, but it was clear they didn't believe us. They said they'd check it out, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing yellow eyes. I stopped going into the woods, stopped camping and hiking. My friends were the same. We drifted apart, the memory of that night too much to bear. A few months later, I heard on the news that a couple had gone missing near Devil's Knob. Their bodies were found days later, torn apart, just like Tom had described. The news called it a wild animal attack, but I knew better. I knew what we had seen. I moved away from Oregon after that, trying to put as much distance between myself and those woods as possible. I never went camping again. I never told anyone else about what happened, but every now and then, I dream about those glowing eyes and wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I often wonder if it's still out there, that creature. I wonder if it's hunting, waiting for its next victim. I wonder if anyone will ever believe our story. But most of all, I wonder if I'll ever be able to forget that night, or if it'll haunt me for the rest of my life. Tom, Jack, and Pete tried to move on too. Tom went back to his adventurous ways, but he stuck to safer, more populated areas. Jack became more reclusive, his jokes fewer and far between. Pete just seemed to disappear. He moved away without a word, and none of us have heard from him since. Maybe he's trying to forget too. I've spent years trying to understand what we saw. Was it really a werewolf, or just some freak of nature? I don't know. All I know is that it was real, and it was dangerous, and I'll never go back to those woods again. Life went on, as it does. I got married, had a couple of kids, settled into a routine. But every time I hear a strange noise at night, or see a shadow moving out of the corner of my eye, I'm right back in those woods, running for my life. My wife doesn't understand why I hate the outdoors so much, why I refuse to go camping or hiking. I haven't told her. I don't want her to think I'm crazy. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep, I think about that night. I think about the creature, and I wonder if it's still out there, lurking in the darkness. I wonder if anyone else has seen it, or if it's still hunting, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting campers. I hope not. I hope it's gone, or dead, or whatever happens to creatures like that. But deep down, I know the truth. I know it's still out there somewhere, and I know that no matter how far I run or how much time passes, I'll never be able to escape it. So if you're ever out in the woods near Devil's Knob, be careful. Stick to the trails and don't go out at night. And if you hear something moving in the trees or see a pair of glowing yellow eyes, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back, because it's out there and it's hungry. As for me, I've made peace with it as much as I can. I don't go looking for trouble, and I don't talk about that night, but I keep a gun in my house, just in case. And every time I hear a strange noise outside, I remember. I remember those eyes, and I remember to stay inside where it's safe. Maybe one day I'll be able to forget. But until then, I'll keep my doors locked and my gun close, and I'll pray that I never see those eyes again. I sometimes wonder what happened to Pete. Maybe he found a way to deal with it, or maybe he's still running. I hope he's okay. I hope he found some peace. But most of all, I hope that no one else has to go through what we did. I hope that creature is gone for good. But deep down, I know the truth. I know it's still out there somewhere, and I know that no matter how far I run or how much time passes, I'll never be able to escape it. So, if you're ever out in the woods near Devil's Knob, be careful, stick to the trails and don't go out at night. And if you hear something moving in the trees or see a pair of glowing yellow eyes, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back, because it's out there and it's hungry. For now, I'll keep living my life, trying to forget, but I'll never go back to those woods, and I'll never forget those eyes. So, if you're planning a camping trip, maybe think twice about where you go. And if you hear a story about a werewolf in the woods, don't laugh it off, because sometimes the stories are true. My name's Randy Smith, and this was back in 2019, while camping in Montana's Glacier National Park. I was taking a break from work, trying to clear my head in the kind of place where the only alarm clock is a crow's call at dawn. I had an old RV I'd picked up at an estate sale, rusty but still running, and a few days off that felt like the perfect recipe for a solo camping trip. To be honest, I needed it. My life back home was a blur of long shifts and, in some ironic twist of fate, exactly zero free time to unwind. So here I was, smack in the middle of a scenic, supposedly peaceful paradise, just me, the trees, and whatever animals wandered around after dark. I'd parked at a secluded spot near Lake McDonald, with tall pines swaying in the early evening breeze and the air thick with that fresh scent you only get out in nature. After the RV was settled and I'd cracked open a beer, I sat outside, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, casting a dim glow across the valley. And that's when I noticed him. This guy wasn't exactly the type you'd expect to see out here. He was tall, wiry, and wore a tattered red jacket that looked like it had been through as many storms as he had. His hair was greasy, straggling down to his shoulders, and his beard wasn't much better. He lingered by the tree line, pacing, hands fidgeting like he had too much energy or too little control. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, wondering if he'd pass by or stop and say something, but he just stood there, staring in my direction, and I could feel his gaze even from 50 feet away. Finally, he yelled, "Got any food?" I raised my beer in a sort of silent toast. Just a little. Figured I'd save it for tomorrow. He squinted at me like he was sizing me up. His eyes seemed too wide, darting around as if there was something behind him, just out of sight. "Out here by yourself?" he asked, voice rough like gravel. "Yep, nice to get some quiet," I said, trying to sound casual. My mind was already running through possible scenarios. Maybe he was just another camper, a wanderer who'd lost his way, or maybe he was something worse. After a long, uncomfortable pause, he nodded and muttered, "Fair enough," then disappeared into the trees just as suddenly as he'd appeared. The rest of the evening was eerily quiet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to show up again, but he didn't. Still, I could feel a tension hanging in the air. Something about that guy's gaze stuck with me, like a bad taste that wouldn't go away. Eventually, I headed inside the RV, locked the doors, and settled down for the night, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a guy in the woods, maybe a bit rough around the edges, but harmless. But around midnight, a strange sound broke the silence, a faint scraping at the door. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon or maybe some other animal, but when I looked out the window, I saw the man from earlier, crouched down, hands pressed against the side of the RV, peering in through the narrow windows. His eyes looked different, sharper somehow, and he was muttering to himself, words too quiet for me to catch. I froze. My mind raced, debating whether to confront him or stay hidden, but before I could decide, he started walking around the RV, fingers trailing along the metal with that same rhythmic scraping. My heart was pounding, and I clenched the handle of a pocket knife I kept in the drawer by my bed. I was starting to regret not bringing something a little more reliable. As he circled the RV, his mumbling grew louder. I heard words like hungry and flesh, phrases that made my stomach churn. I considered calling for help, but I was in a dead zone with no signal, and besides, shouting could just provoke him. Then came the sound of something heavy hitting the door, a solid, deliberate thud. He was trying to get inside. "Hey man, you better back off," I shouted, hoping my voice sounded tougher than I felt, but the pounding didn't stop. Instead, it grew more frantic, like he was beating the door with his fists, each blow rattling through the RV. I braced myself, tightening my grip on the knife, knowing that if he got through the door, it would come down to a fight I wasn't sure I could win. Suddenly the pounding stopped. Silence. I waited, muscles tense, listening for any sign of him, but the air was thick with stillness. Just as I started to breathe again, the door handle turned slowly, carefully, as if he was trying to be quiet. My blood ran cold. I hadn't locked the handle. I'd only closed the bolt on the deadlock. He was testing the door, trying to see if there was a weak point somewhere he could exploit. "Come on," I muttered, wishing he'd give up, but the handle turned again, and then, with one last bang, the door burst open, swinging wildly as he lunged inside. In the dim glow from the cabin lights, I saw him clearly, the crazed, hungry look in his eyes, his hands caked with dirt, and his breath reeking like something rotten. Without thinking, I lunged, slashing the knife toward him. The blade caught his arm, and he yelped, staggering back, clutching the wound. Blood dripped from his sleeve, staining the floor, but he didn't retreat. Instead he laughed, a low, guttural chuckle that sent chills down my spine. "You think that's going to stop me?" he sneered, licking the blood from his hand. The sight turned my stomach, but I didn't have time to hesitate. He lunged again, this time with a metal spike I hadn't noticed before, a twisted, rusty piece of iron he must have found out in the woods. I barely dodged, stumbling back against the bed as he swung wildly, the spike cutting through the air inches from my face. My heart was racing, panic setting in as I realized he was relentless, like a predator that had tasted blood and wouldn't stop until he'd taken his fill. In a desperate move, I kicked his legs out from under him. He crashed to the floor, the spike slipping from his grasp. I grabbed it, thrusting it toward him with all the strength I had. It plunged into his shoulder, and he screamed, thrashing wildly as I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He was still moving, still crawling toward me, blood pooling around him like some twisted halo. "I'll find you," he spat, his face contorted in rage. "You can't hide from me." With no other choice, I threw open the RV door and ran, sprinting through the trees, branches scratching at my face as I stumbled through the darkness. Behind me, I could hear his voice, that same relentless laughter, echoing through the woods, growing fainter as I put more distance between us. After what felt like hours, I reached the main road, where another camper, a middle-aged guy named Ed, spotted me and stopped. He listened to my story, nodding solemnly as he called for help on his radio. The rangers arrived within the hour, combing the woods for any sign of the man, but by the time they reached my RV, he was gone. The rangers found bloodstains on the floor, traces of a struggle, but the man himself had vanished. They told me he was likely a drifter, someone who'd been living off the grid and finally snapped. But later, as I was recounting the night to one of the older rangers, he shared a theory of his own, a grim rumor about a man who'd lived in the mountains, surviving off whatever or whoever he could find. They'd called him the Lost Hunter, a local legend. But maybe not so legendary after all. After the incident, I did some digging, trying to piece together the fragments of his life, searching through local archives and old newspapers. The man was supposedly named Elias Marsh, a former guide who'd lost his sanity years ago, driven mad by isolation and desperation. My name is Harold Adams, and back in 2016, I took my old RV up to Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. After years of working behind a desk, I figured some fresh air might do me good, or at least give my laptop tan a break. You see, I'm the kind of guy who thinks outside is that place you walk through to get from your house to your car. So there I was, a city slicker in the wilderness, trying to ignite a campfire with nothing but 2 sticks and sheer willpower. Spoiler alert, sticks don't combust. Out of sheer embarrassment, I ended up using a lighter and some old receipts. Turns out my tax documents were good for something after all. The campsite was nestled near a dense forest, the kind that looks picturesque until you realize there are more bugs than pixels in an old video game. My RV was parked by a small clearing overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Honestly, it was the kind of view that makes you consider quitting your job and writing poetry. If only I had a knack for rhyming anything other than cat and hat. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I settled into a foldable chair with a lukewarm beer. That's when I noticed an older gentleman at the campsite next to mine. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face that suggested he'd seen more sunsets than I had hot meals. He gave me a nod, and I raised my beer in return. "Evening," he said. "First time up here? Is it that obvious?" I chuckled. He smiled. "Just a hunch." "Name's Harold Adams," I replied. We chatted for a bit, and he told me about the best hiking trails and fishing spots. He seemed friendly enough, and it was nice to have someone to talk to besides the mosquitoes. Before long, he headed back to his site, and I retreated into my RV for the night. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of rustling outside. At first, I dismissed it as wildlife, probably a raccoon rummaging through my trash, but then I heard muffled voices. Peering through the window, I saw two figures moving near Harold's campsite. They were dressed in dark clothing, and something about their movements made my skin crawl. Probably just late-night hikers, I told myself. After all, who was I to judge? I'd once gone grocery shopping at 2 a.m., wearing pajama bottoms and flip-flops. But then a sharp cry pierced the night, followed by a thud. My heart pounded in my chest. That was no raccoon, and those weren't hikers. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, only to remember I had zero reception out here. "Perfect," I muttered. Should have invested in that satellite phone instead of the deluxe cup holder. Summoning every ounce of courage, or maybe just a strong sense of curiosity, I decided to check it out. I slipped on my shoes and crept outside, keeping to the shadows as I approached Harold's site. The flickering light of his dying campfire cast eerie shadows. I spotted Harold lying on the ground, motionless. The two figures were rifling through his belongings. "Hey!" I shouted before I could stop myself. They snapped their heads toward me. One was a burly man with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down his cheek. The other was shorter, wearing a hoodie that obscured his face. "Mind your own business," the big one growled. "Funny," I quipped nervously. "I was just about to say the same to you." Without warning, the smaller one pulled out a knife. "Looks like we've got ourselves another problem," he sneered. My survival instincts, or perhaps my panic, kicked in. I turned on my heel and sprinted back toward my RV. Behind me, I heard them giving chase. Just my luck, I thought. I finally start running, and it's not even for exercise. I reached the RV and slammed the door shut, locking it. My hands trembled as I fumbled to find the keys. The engine roared to life just as they started pounding on the door. The RV lurched forward, and I sped down the narrow dirt road, branches scraping against the sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. In my rearview mirror, I saw their silhouettes fade into the darkness. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The road ahead forked, and in my haste, I had no idea which way led to safety. "Left or right?" I mumbled. "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo." A loud bang cut me off. The RV jolted, and I realized I'd blown a tire. Fantastic. "Next time, I'm vacationing at a 5-star hotel," I grumbled. I had no choice but to keep moving, driving on the rim. I could hear the metal grinding against the gravel. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a dim light flickering through the trees. A house out here. Desperate, I pulled into a makeshift driveway leading up to a rustic cabin, parking half-hazardously. I jumped out and raced to the front door, pounding on it. "Hello, is anyone home? I need help." The door creaked open, and a middle-aged woman with kind eyes peered out. "Goodness, what's the matter?" "There's been an attack," I gasped. "My friend, an older man, he's hurt. We need to call the police." She ushered me inside. "Calm down, dear. The nearest phone is a few miles away, but my husband can drive you." "Tom," she called out. A tall man appeared from another room, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What's all the commotion?" I quickly explained the situation. He grabbed a set of keys. "Let's get you to the ranger station." As we headed out, I noticed a collection of hunting rifles mounted on the wall. "Any chance we could arm ourselves?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not necessary. Besides, those are antiques." We got into his pickup truck. and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this nightmare was ending. As we drove down the winding road, I glanced back and saw the woman's silhouette in the doorway watching us. "Strange night, huh?" Tom remarked. "You have no idea," I sighed. We drove in silence for a few minutes before the truck slowed to a stop. "Why are we stopping?" I asked. He turned to face me, his expression devoid of warmth. End of the line. My stomach dropped. From the shadows, the two attackers emerged, grins plastered across their faces. "You did good, Tom," the big one said. "Family sticks together," Tom replied. "I was trapped." "You're all in this together?" The smaller one chuckled. "Smart guy. Shame we can't let you leave." Panic surged through me. "Look, I don't have anything valuable. Take whatever you want." The big guy cracked his knuckles. "Oh, it's not about that. We can't have witnesses." Desperation took over. I flung the door open and bolted into the woods. Branches whipped against my face, and roots threatened to trip me with every step. Behind me, their footsteps and laughter echoed. "Run, rabbit, run," one of them taunted. Note to self, cardio is important, I wheezed. I stumbled upon a small creek and splashed through it, hoping to mask my trail. The forest was a maze, and my sense of direction was as reliable as a chocolate teapot. I needed a hiding spot. Up ahead, I spotted an old abandoned mine entrance. Without thinking, I darted inside. The darkness swallowed me, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. I crouched behind a large boulder, trying to steady my breathing. Footsteps approached the entrance. "He couldn't have gone far," Tom's voice echoed. "Split up," the big guy ordered. "He might be hiding inside." I held my breath as their flashlight beams danced across the walls. Sweat trickled down my forehead and my heart pounded like a drum solo at a rock concert. Just then, a faint whisper reached my ears. "This way," it seemed to say. I glanced around but saw no one. Great, now I'm hearing things, I thought. But the whisper came again, more insistent. Against my better judgment, or perhaps because I had no better options, I followed the sound deeper into the mine. The tunnel narrowed and the floor sloped downward. Behind me, the voices of my pursuers grew fainter. The path led me to a small chamber where faint light filtered through cracks above. In the dim glow, I saw markings on the walls, names and dates carved into the stone. One name stood out, Harold Johnston, 1975. "Harold, the man from the campsite," I murmured. Footsteps echoed down the tunnel. They were getting closer. I spotted a narrow crevice at the back of the chamber. Squeezing through, I found myself in another passage that led upward. Clambering over rocks, I emerged outside on a hillside overlooking the forest. I took a moment to catch my breath. The cool night air was a relief, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I needed to find help. In the distance, I saw the faint glow of lights, probably the ranger station Tom had mentioned. With renewed determination, I made my way toward it, careful to stay hidden. Half an hour later, scratched and exhausted, I stumbled into the station. A lone ranger sat behind a desk, surprised at my disheveled appearance. "Whoa! What happened to you?" I quickly recounted the night's events. He listened attentively, his expression growing serious. "That's quite a tale," he said. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in that area." He picked up a radio and called for backup. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he assured me. Within the hour, police officers arrived. They took my statement and organized a search team. As dawn approached, they returned with grim news. They had found Harold's campsite and his body. "Looks like he put up a fight," one of the officers noted. "But there's more," they continued. They uncovered a makeshift burial site near the cabin. Inside were several bodies in various states of decay. Among them was the real Tom, the owner of the cabin, who had been missing for months. The man posing as Tom was identified as Richard Rick Thompson, a drifter with a history of violence. The others were his accomplices, Mark and Joey Thompson, his brothers. In the final sentence, after the chaos had settled, I learned that the Thompson brothers had been preying on campers for years, using the secluded area to commit their heinous acts. My name's Logan Cooper, and in 2019 I decided to take an RV trip through Canada. something I'd wanted to do since I was a kid. I'd saved up enough, finally had the time, and figured it was a good way to reset after leaving a job I'd been stuck in for years. Besides, I thought of myself as a decent outdoorsman, grew up camping and fishing, so I wasn't too worried about anything I might run into. On this particular trip, I was parked at a remote campground just outside of Yoho National Park in British Columbia. It wasn't exactly bustling with people. The only other vehicle I saw belonged to an older couple who left around mid-morning, leaving me alone. The isolation wasn't new, and I liked it that way. Quiet, just me and the trees, my dog Copper at my side, and enough canned goods to last a week. The first few days went just fine. I hiked, read, and even got some nice shots of the stars out there, where the light pollution didn't reach. It was on the fourth day that things took a strange turn. That evening, Copper started acting restless, sniffing the air in an odd way and barking at every little sound outside. At first, I chalked it up to an animal passing by, but as the night went on, his behavior got worse, more anxious. He started pawing at the door, whining, and I began to wonder if something bigger than a raccoon was out there. Maybe a wolf or a bear, though I'd seen no signs of either. After a couple of hours, I tried to calm him down by opening the RV door and shining my flashlight outside, hoping to show him there was nothing there. But the moment I stepped outside, Copper bolted into the woods, barking his head off. I grabbed my flashlight and ran after him, yelling his name, but he was too fast, and soon I couldn't see him or hear him anymore. After a good 10 minutes of yelling and looking, I figured I should head back to the RV, hoping he'd come back on his own. But as I was walking back, I noticed something that didn't sit right with me. The path back looked different. The trees seemed closer, denser than I remembered, and there was an eerie silence that hadn't been there before. I started to feel this gnawing in my gut, like I'd missed some sign or warning, and as much as I wanted to brush it off, something told me not to ignore it. Finally, I made it back to the RV, but Copper was nowhere to be seen, which put me on edge. I stayed up most of the night, leaving the door slightly ajar in case he came back. I waited, but the night stretched on, cold and unnaturally quiet. I thought about getting some sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was there, watching. The next morning, Copper still hadn't returned. My instincts told me to pack up and head back, but I couldn't just leave him behind, so I decided to give it one more day and try searching for him. I took a trail near the RV, one I hadn't tried before, hoping he might have gone that way. After a good hour of walking, I found nothing. Not even a trace of paw prints or fur. As I was turning back, I spotted something strange through the trees, a makeshift campsite, if you could even call it that. There was an old tent, half collapsed and covered in moss. Around it were random items strewn about, like somebody had left in a hurry. I found a tattered backpack with clothes in it, half buried under leaves, but no sign of its owner. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A collar that looked almost exactly like Copper's. I rushed over, my heart pounding, but as I got closer I realized it wasn't his. This collar was old, frayed at the edges, and covered in dirt. Whoever had been here had brought a dog too, and for some reason they'd left in a hurry. I backed away from the campsite, suddenly very aware that I wasn't alone out here. The eerie silence returned, the same one from the night before, and that's when I heard it. A faint rustling in the trees behind me. I froze, my heart thumping, and slowly turned around. Nothing but trees. Still, the feeling that I was being watched intensified. I sped up, practically jogging back to my RV, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. But as I neared the clearing where my RV was parked, I saw movement near it. Someone standing beside the door, trying to open it. The man was tall, wiry, and wearing clothes that looked worn and stained, like he'd been living out here for a while. His hair was tangled, his skin rough and scarred, and he had this grin on his face that I'll never forget. Wide, too wide, like he was enjoying the sight of me staring at him. I gripped the flashlight tighter, wishing it was something heavier, and called out, "Hey, get away from my RV." The man didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. He just stared, that grin never leaving his face, as he took a step toward me. "Lost something, didn't you?" he called, his voice scratchy and low. "Where's my dog?" I demanded, my heart racing. I was prepared to fight him if I had to, but he just chuckled and took another step forward. "I can help you find him," he said, his tone dripping with something that sent a chill down my spine. He pointed back toward the woods. "He went that way, looking for something just like you." I took a step back, trying to keep my distance. "What do you want?" His grin faded, replaced by a look of irritation. "I don't like people interrupting me," he said, his voice hardening. "I was here first, and I don't appreciate you poking around in my things." Realizing he must have been the one living at that abandoned campsite, I took another step back, trying to appear calm while my mind raced with plans to get to the RV and lock myself inside. But he must have noticed, because he lunged toward me, his hand reaching for something in his pocket. I turned and ran, adrenaline kicking in. I sprinted into the woods, hoping to lose him among the trees. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, cursing and shouting in that same scratchy voice. I veered off the path, hoping the thicker trees would slow him down, and tried to circle back toward the RV. But he was fast, too fast for someone who looked as ragged as he did. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the RV through the trees and made a beeline for it, heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached the door, I felt his hand grab my shoulder, yanking me back. I spun around, swinging the flashlight at his head, but he ducked, grabbing my arm and twisting it painfully. In the scuffle, I felt something sharp press against my side. A knife. "Why'd you come out here?" he hissed, his face inches from mine, that awful grin back again. "Why couldn't you just leave things alone?" I struggled, using every ounce of strength to push him off, but he was strong, stronger than he looked. As we grappled, I managed to grab his wrist, twisting it until he dropped the knife. I kicked it away and used the moment to shove him back, breaking free. I scrambled to the RV, slamming the door and locking it just as he lunged at it, banging his fists against the window. "Open up!" he screamed, slamming his fists against the glass hard enough that I thought it might crack. I backed away, breathing hard, scanning the RV for anything I could use as a weapon. My mind raced with escape plans, but none of them felt safe. After a few more bangs, he suddenly stopped, staring at me through the window with that grin, like he was enjoying the chase. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat, eyes locked on the tree line, waiting for any sign of him. But the forest stayed silent, too silent, until dawn broke. As soon as there was enough light, I started the engine and left, not caring where I was headed, as long as it was away from there. A few hours down the road, I pulled into a small town and reported what had happened to the local police. They took down my statement, asked a few questions, but when they checked the area, they didn't find anything. No abandoned campsite, no signs of the man, not even the knife. They told me he was probably a drifter, someone who'd been squatting out there. But I knew what I saw. As I was leaving the station, one of the officers mentioned something that stuck with me. He said they'd had reports like mine over the years, people encountering a man who didn't want them there, who'd make them leave and disappear back into the woods. On my drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting for the next camper who stayed a little too long or wandered a little too close to his territory. And as for Copper, I never saw him again. My name is Jeffrey Walker, and back in 2017 took my RV out to the remote stretches near Banff, Alberta, hoping to find some peace away from my hectic life. I'd always been the kind of guy who found solace in the quiet embrace of nature, and this trip was supposed to be my retreat after years of working in the bustling city. The open road was a welcome change. The drive up the Trans-Canada Highway was long but soothing. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks piercing the sky like silent guardians. I had my favorite playlist humming in the background and a thermos of black coffee within arm's reach. I pulled into a secluded spot by a crystalline lake surrounded by dense pine forests. The area was sparse, with only a few other campers scattered miles apart. It was perfect. I set up my RV, unfolded a chair, and sat by the water's edge, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky transformed into a canvas of oranges and purples. If there was ever a postcard moment, this was it. As darkness settled, I lit a small campfire. The crackling of the wood and the chorus of nocturnal creatures created a symphony that city dwellers like me rarely experience. I roasted some marshmallows, feeling a bit like a kid again. The stars overhead were innumerable, each one a tiny beacon piercing the velvet darkness. The tranquility was interrupted when I heard a rustling from the tree line. Probably just a deer or some small animal, I thought, but then I heard it again. Branches snapping, leaves crunching. It sounded heavier than a deer. I brushed it off, figuring that the forest was full of creatures, and went back to my marshmallows. A faint light flickered between the trees. It was unusual, but I assumed it might be another camper or perhaps a park ranger. Minutes later, the light vanished. I didn't think much of it until I heard footsteps approaching. They were slow and deliberate, the kind that didn't belong to an animal. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" Silence. I stood up, my eyes scanning the dark woods. "If you're trying to scare me, it's not going to work," I joked nervously. "I've seen every horror movie out there. Still nothing." I chuckled to myself, thinking I was probably overreacting. Maybe I needed to lay off the scary podcasts. I decided to head back into the RV. As I secured the door, I heard a faint whisper carried by the wind. It sounded like my name. I paused, my hand hovering over the lock. "Great, now I'm hearing things," I muttered. Climbing into bed, I tried to shake off the unease. Just as I was drifting off, a loud thud jolted me awake. It came from the side of the RV. My heart pounded as I listened intently. Another thud, followed by a scraping sound, like metal against metal. I grabbed a flashlight and, against my better judgment, decided to investigate. Peering out the window, I saw nothing but darkness. Gathering some courage, I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold air hit me, and the forest was eerily quiet. I circled the RV, the flashlight beam cutting through the night. On the side of the vehicle, I noticed long scratch marks etched into the metal. "What the hell?" I whispered. A sudden movement caught my eye, a shadow darting between the trees. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Again, no response. I retreated back inside and locked the door. This was no longer amusing. I considered calling the local authorities, but my phone had no signal. Typical. I remembered the satellite phone I had for emergencies and made a mental note to dig it out if things got worse. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, and the night's fears seemed almost silly. I examined the scratches in daylight. They were real, all right. Deep grooves that couldn't have been made by any animal I knew of. I decided to drive into the nearest town to report the incident. Packing up, I started the engine, but it sputtered and died. "Come on, not now," I groaned. Several more attempts yielded the same result. Opening the hood, I was met with a mess of cut wires and torn hoses. Someone had sabotaged the engine. Panic set in. I was stranded. I remembered the satellite phone and dug it out from a storage compartment. As I tried to power it on, I realized the battery was missing. This was no coincidence. A chill ran down my spine. I needed help, and fast. Gathering a backpack with some essentials, a bottle of water, a pocket knife, and a small first aid kit, I decided to hike back toward the main road. It was a few miles, but I didn't have much choice. The forest seemed denser than before, the trees towering like silent sentinels. Every snap of a twig made me jump. About an hour into the hike, I came across a clearing with an old, dilapidated cabin. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Relief washed over me. Maybe whoever lived here could help. I approached the cabin and knocked on the door. "Hello, is anyone home?" The door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall and lanky, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were worn, and his eyes had a wild look to them. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said with a crooked smile. "Hi, sorry to bother you. My RV broke down and I could use some help," I said. He eyed me up and down. "Not many folks come out this way." "Yeah, I'm starting to see why." I attempted a laugh. "Do you have a phone or any tools?" "Someone tampered with my engine," he scratched his chin. "Tampered, you say? That's mighty strange. Tell me about it." "Why don't you come inside? Got some stew on the stove." Every instinct told me to decline, but I was desperate. Sure, I could use a bite. The interior of the cabin was cluttered with tools, animal pelts, and jars filled with unidentifiable objects. The smell was a mix of spices and something metallic. "Sit down," he gestured to a wooden chair. I sat, trying to appear casual. "Do you live out here alone?" I asked. "Mostly. Name's Earl, by the way." "Jeffrey, nice to meet you." He ladled some stew into a bowl and handed it to me. I hesitated. "Go on, eat up," he encouraged. I took a small sip. It was good, but not terrible. "So do you have a phone I could use?" I asked. He shook his head. "No phone out here. Don't much care for 'em." "Right. Maybe you have some tools? My engine needs a bit of work." He grinned. "Oh, I've got tools, but it's getting late. Best you stay here tonight." Alarm bells rang in my head. "I appreciate the offer, but I should really get back." He stepped closer. "I insist," I stood up. "Actually, I think I'll be on my way." Before I could move, he blocked the door. "You ain't going nowhere." I glanced around for anything I could use as a weapon. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said. He chuckled. "Trouble? Now why would there be trouble?" My hand tightened around the bowl. Without thinking, I threw the hot stew into his face. He screamed, clutching his eyes. I seized the moment and bolted past him, knocking over a table. Jars shattered on the floor, releasing pungent odors. "Get back here!" he roared. I sprinted into the woods, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I could hear him crashing through the underbrush. "You can't hide!" he shouted. My heart pounded in my chest. I weaved between trees, trying to put as much distance as possible. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, and I tumbled into a shallow pit. Dazed, I looked around. The pit was lined with sharpened stakes, some stained dark. Horror washed over me as I realized this was a trap, and not the only one. Scattered around were bones, human bones. Skulls grinned up at me, their empty eye sockets haunting. I scrambled out of the pit, adrenaline fueling me. Earl's footsteps grew closer. "You found my collection," he laughed maniacally. I needed a plan. Spotting a large branch, I picked it up as a makeshift weapon. He emerged from the shadows, a rusted machete in hand. "You shouldn't have run." Earl said. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing the branch. He tilted his head. Or what? He lunged at me, swinging the machete. I dodged the blade, slicing through the air inches from my face. I swung the branch, catching him across the jaw. He staggered but didn't go down. "Feisty one," he spat blood. He charged again. This time I was ready. As he closed in, I sidestepped and tripped him. He fell hard, the machete slipping from his grasp. I grabbed it quickly, pointing it at him. "It's over, Earl." He laughed, a chilling sound. "You think you can beat me?" "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He sneered. "Everyone's got to have a hobby. You're sick." He lunged at me again, but I swung the machete, cutting across his arm. He howled in pain. I didn't wait for another attack. I ran, pushing myself to the limits. The forest seemed endless, but finally I burst onto the main road. Miraculously, a truck was approaching. I waved frantically. The driver slowed down, a middle-aged woman with a concerned expression. "Please, I need help," I gasped. She unlocked the door and I climbed in. "What happened to you?" she asked, eyeing the blood on the machete. "There's a man back there. He tried to kill me." Her eyes widened. "We need to get you to the police." "Yes, please." As we drove away, I glanced back. Earl stood at the edge of the woods, watching us with a sinister smile. At the police station, I counted everything. Officers were dispatched to the area immediately. 2 days later, they informed me they had found the cabin. Inside, they discovered evidence linking Earl Thompson, a fugitive with a history of violent crimes, to multiple disappearances in the region. The remains of at least 5 individuals were recovered. Earl himself was nowhere to be found. An extensive manhunt was launched, but he had vanished without a trace. I was allowed to return home, my RV towed and repaired. The authorities assured me they would keep me updated. Weeks later, I received a call. They had apprehended Earl in a small town miles away. He was found attempting to lure another victim. Knowing he was behind bars brought a sense of closure. Earl Thompson, a drifter with a twisted sense of amusement, had his reign of terror ended. His motives remained a dark mystery, but at least he could no longer harm anyone else. The first thing I'll tell you is that nothing prepares you for a day like this. You can train all you want, get used to the idea of something going wrong, but when it actually happens, it's like getting hit with a truck. You're never really ready. It was back in 1999, and I was stationed out in the Black Hills National Forest, South Dakota. I'd been doing this park ranger thing for about 8 years by that point. Long enough to know the place like the back of my hand, but not long enough to be completely jaded. That year, I was running a solo patrol along a less traveled section of the forest, closer to the Wyoming border, where the trees grow thick and the silence presses down on you. Most people don't go that far unless they're looking for trouble, or if they're the kind of folks who think hiking alone in the wilderness is a good idea. I guess that describes me too, although I get paid for it, so I figure I'm allowed to be stupid every now and then. I remember setting out that morning, expecting it to be the usual routine, checking campsites for any idiots who forgot to drown their fires, making sure no one was hunting without permits, that kind of thing. Except, something felt off. You ever walk into a room and just feel like the air has changed, even though you can't explain why? That's how it felt all day, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. About midday, I found the first one. It was a campsite, but not the kind we allow in designated areas. No, this was a backwoods setup, clearly not official, tents torn apart, supplies scattered, and blood. More than enough to know that this was no wild animal attack. At least, not the kind I'm used to. People think bears or wolves are the worst you'll face out here, but this was different. There were 3 tents. 2 were empty, shredded like some large animal had gone through them, but it wasn't until I checked the 3rd that I realized just how bad this was. Inside, I found the first body, or what was left of it. Now, I've seen animals do some rough things to people, but this was on another level. The guy looked like he'd been torn apart by something with a whole lot more anger than your average bear. I didn't have a gun with me that day, which was pretty standard protocol. The idea is that we're not supposed to engage with anything unless absolutely necessary. Besides, most of the time, the biggest danger we face is a drunk tourist or someone getting too close to wildlife. That day, though, I was wishing for something more than just a radio and a can of bear spray. I called it in, but reception out there is spotty at best. All I managed to get was a broken message to the ranger station, something about a possible attack and needing backup. Then I started tracking. Now, you might think I'm an idiot for going after whatever did this, and I won't argue with you, but that's the job. I couldn't just leave the scene without trying to figure out what had happened, and if there were survivors, they wouldn't stand a chance if I didn't at least try to find them. About an hour into the search, I found the second body. It was further off the trail, lying face down in the dirt. I didn't need to roll him over to know he was gone. Same story as the first, except this time there were tracks. Here's where it gets weird. I've seen tracks from all sorts of animals in my time, wolves, cougars, even the occasional grizzly, but these were none of those. They were long, clawed, and deep, like something heavy had been walking on 2 legs, dragging its prey behind it. My first thought was maybe it was some kind of sick joke, but as I followed them further, The feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I've never been one to scare easily, but I'm not too proud to admit that I was starting to get real uncomfortable. Then I heard it, a noise off in the distance. It was faint, like a low moan carried on the wind, but it was enough to make me pause. Whatever it wasn't human. At least, not anymore. I moved toward the sound, careful not to make too much noise myself. You don't survive long in this job without learning how to be quiet when it counts. The tracks led to a narrow ravine, the kind of place that would have been easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, and that's when I saw the third body, or what was left of it. This one had been dragged into the ravine, half buried under some brush. It was in worse shape than the others. Whatever had done this was getting angrier or hungrier, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I saw on the other side of the ravine. It was crouched low, moving slowly, like it was inspecting its kill. I've never seen anything like it. At first I thought it was a bear, but it was too thin, too wrong. It had the shape of a man, but its arms were too long, its back hunched like it was carrying something heavy. The skin looked almost leathery, stretched tight over its bones, and its face, if you could call it that, was twisted, contorted like something that had never been meant to exist. I did what any sane person would do. I backed up slow and careful, but I must have made some noise, because it stopped and turned its head in my direction. That's when I knew I was in trouble. It started moving toward me, not fast but deliberate, like it had all the time in the world to catch me. Here's where it gets funny, though. You ever have one of those moments where everything is going to hell and your brain decides to make a joke? That's what happened to me right then. I remember thinking, well, guess I'm not going to make it back in time for that cold beer I had waiting. Stupid, I know, but sometimes humor is the only thing that keeps you from losing it. I don't know how I managed to stay calm enough to move. I backed up faster, keeping my eyes on it, and that's when I realized the thing was limping. One leg was dragging behind it like it had been injured. That gave me an idea. If I could get far enough ahead, maybe I'd stand a chance of outrunning it. I turned and ran. Now, I'm not built for speed, but fear can do wonders for your cardio. I didn't look back until I was sure I had some distance. That's when I heard the sound again, only this time it was closer. I found a tree with low branches and scrambled up, figuring it was better than staying on the ground. From up there, I could see it moving through the trees, slower now, but still coming. I had one chance. If I could get to the old fire lookout about a mile away, maybe I could radio for help again, and with any luck, someone would hear me. I waited until it was far enough away, then dropped down and started running again. This time, I didn't stop. Didn't even think about it. When I reached the lookout, I slammed the door behind me and grabbed the radio. It took a couple of tries, but I finally got through to the station. Backup was on the way, but it would take time. I wasn't sure I had that kind of luxury. I checked the door, bolted it, then climbed up to the observation deck to keep watch. That's when I saw it again, standing at the edge of the trees, watching. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there like it was waiting for something. I kept my eyes on it, ready to bolt if I needed to. After what felt like an eternity, it turned and limped back into the woods. When the rangers arrived, we found the bodies but no sign of the creature. I gave my report, showed them the tracks, but by then, whatever it was had gone deeper into the forest. For the official story, probably some animal attack. That's what they'll tell people at least. But I know better. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, and next time, I don't think it'll be so willing to let anyone walk away. My name is Jeffrey Walker, and in 2006 I found myself in the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument in southern Oregon. It wasn't a planned getaway. I was running from a messy breakup and an even messier financial situation. Camping seemed like a cheap solution. With a borrowed tent, a Costco multi-pack of trail mix, and no real survival skills, I figured I'd channel my inner rugged individualist. Spoiler alert, I am not that guy. The morning was uneventful. I hiked a couple of easy trails, marveling at the towering Douglas firs and the strange quiet of the forest. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the sort that made your skin crawl, like when someone stares at you for too long. Still, I pressed on. The campsite was isolated, just me and a rented Ford Focus parked a mile down a gravel road, not another soul in sight. Around midday, I decided to explore a narrow, unmarked trail I'd spotted earlier. It wound down into a ravine, the air growing cooler and the sunlight dimming as the canopy thickened overhead. About 30 minutes in, I came across a clearing with what I first thought was an old fire pit. It was a circle of blackened stones, but they weren't charred from fire. They were slick, as if oozing some kind of residue. Surrounding the stones were odd carved sticks planted upright in the ground. It looked like some avant-garde art installation, or maybe a sacrificial site for someone who worshipped the forest itself. I muttered something about hippies and turned back the way I'd come. Only after walking for what felt like 20 minutes, I ended up back at the clearing. At first, I thought it was déjà vu. Then I noticed the trail I'd left was gone, just dense trees where the path had been. My stomach sank as I realized I was lost. And worse, there was no cell signal. I decided to keep moving. With no landmarks and the sun sliding lower in the sky, panic began to creep in. That's when I heard it, a sound like wet leaves being dragged across gravel. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I stopped, straining to hear, and there it was again, now accompanied by a faint clicking. Not like an animal's claws, sharper, almost metallic. My first thought, coyotes. But coyotes don't sound like that. I picked up the pace, half jogging and trying to quiet the crunch of dead foliage beneath my boots. Every few minutes I'd hear that dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the forest. It seemed to echo, making it impossible to tell which direction it came from. Then the clicking started again, closer this time, almost rhythmic, like a macabre metronome. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into another clearing. Relief washed over me when I spotted a crumbling wooden cabin in the center, half swallowed by moss and vines. It looked ancient, as if it had been abandoned for decades. My gut screamed bad idea, but desperation overruled common sense. I bolted for the cabin, ducking through the rotted doorway and slamming what was left of the door behind me. Inside, the air was thick with mildew, and the floor sagged under my weight. The room was empty except for a rusted stove and a wooden table that leaned at a dangerous angle. There were no windows, just the door I'd come through and a small crawl space that looked like it led to a root cellar. I didn't have time to consider my poor life choices, because that sound, dragging, clicking, was now right outside. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed myself against the wall, clutching a branch I'd picked up earlier. Through the gaps in the rotted wood, I glimpsed movement, a shadow, elongated and grotesque, skittering unnaturally fast past the doorway. The creature entered the cabin before I could react. It was like something out of a nightmare, a hunched, skeletal frame covered in mottled grey skin, stretched taut over bone. Its limbs were long, almost insect-like, ending in jagged, blade-like appendages that scraped the floor with every step. Its head, if you could call it that, was flat and featureless, except for a wide, lipless mouth filled with crooked, serrated teeth. I froze, praying it hadn't seen me. Then it sniffed the air, no nose, just two gaping holes where one should have been, and turned directly toward me. There was no doubt now. It knew I was there. I swung the branch as it lunged forward, the impact doing little more than startling it. It let out a shrill, bone-rattling screech that reverberated through the cabin. I ducked as it swiped at me with one of its bladed limbs, splintering the wall behind me. My options were rapidly dwindling. Spotting the crawl space, I dove for it, narrowly avoiding another strike. The wood beneath me gave way, and I tumbled into the cellar, landing in a heap of dirt and old rotted planks. Above me, the creature slashed at the floor, its claws punching through like jagged spears. I scrambled backward, searching frantically for anything resembling a weapon. My hand closed around a rusted metal pipe, its surface crusted with who knows what. The creature forced its way through the opening, landing with a sickening thud. In the dim light, it was even more horrifying up close. Its limbs moved with an unnatural fluidity, and the smell of decay radiated from its body, choking the air. I swung the pipe as hard as I could, catching it across what I assumed was its torso. The impact elicited a gurgling hiss, but it barely staggered. Desperate, I spotted a jagged shard of wood from the broken planks. As the creature lunged again, I drove the shard upward with every ounce of strength I had. It pierced the creature's chest, sinking deep into its grey flesh. The thing let out a guttural wail, deafening and primal, before collapsing into a twitching heap. I didn't wait to see if it was dead for good. I clawed my way out of the cellar, stumbling back into the forest. My legs burned, and every breath felt like swallowing fire, but I didn't stop until I reached the gravel road where my car was parked. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the world in murky twilight. Then I saw them. 3 more of those things standing at the edge of the forest. Their silhouettes barely visible against the trees. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, as if daring me to come back. I didn't need another invitation to leave. I floored it, kicking up gravel as I sped down the road. Later, I told the local sheriff about what happened. They found the clearing and the cabin, but no bodies. Just deep gouges in the wood and those strange carved sticks surrounding the blackened stones. The sheriff shrugged it off as a bear attack, though I noticed he avoided looking me in the eye when he said it. I moved to the city a week later. Sometimes, though, I wonder, how many more of those things are out there? Carving sticks, dragging their prey through the forest. One thing's for sure, I'm sticking to city parks from now on. At least there, the worst thing lurking around is someone trying to sell you overpriced artisanal hot dogs. My name is Linda Fisher. I'm 31 years old, and I make a living traveling solo across the country in my camper van, documenting off-the-grid destinations for my blog. What happened to me in Ocala National Forest wasn't a story I wanted to write, but I have to. I don't know if I got out. I arrived at Ocala National Forest late in the afternoon, after a long drive through back roads and pine forests. It was my first time here, though I'd read about the area. People talked about disappearances, strange voices in the woods. I thought it was all folklore, the kind of thing locals tell to keep kids from wandering off. I found a clearing near a small lake and parked my van. It was perfect, isolated, quiet. Just me, my camera, and a few days of peace. The first sign that something was wrong happened within an hour. I was setting up my tripod near the van when I checked my phone for the time. 5:15 p.m. When I glanced again, it was 8:45. I felt like I had blinked. I hadn't eaten, hadn't moved from my spot. The sun was still setting, but somehow 3 hours were gone. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe my phone had glitched. That night, as I was lying in bed inside the van, I heard something outside. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. I sat up, heart hammering. I listened. Knock. Knock. I reached for my phone. No signal. I took a deep breath and peered out the window. Nothing. Just the dark outline of the trees, unmoving in the still air. Then I saw them. Footprints. Bare, human footprints in the dirt circling my van. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. I checked my camera, flipping through the photos I had taken the day before. Then I stopped. There were pictures I didn't remember taking, blurry shots of my van, my own shadow stretching across the dirt. One of my bed taken from inside the van. My stomach twisted. I had locked the doors. No one else was here. I told myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe I had set the camera on a timer. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe. That afternoon I went hiking. The forest was dense, the air thick with humidity. I stopped to take a few shots of the moss-draped trees when I noticed something up ahead. A person. A woman. Wearing my clothes. I froze. She was walking through the trees, her back to me, Same dark green jacket, same jeans, same brown hiking boots. "Hey!" I called out. She stopped, turned. I couldn't see her face, just a blank, featureless void where it should have been. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my camera. When I looked again, she was gone. I ran back to the van. I locked the doors. I pulled the curtains shut. That night my reflection started acting strange. At first it was subtle, a delay, a flicker. I turned my head and for a split second the reflection didn't. Then it smiled. I didn't. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. I took a selfie just to be sure. When I checked the screen, the photo showed two of me, one standing behind me, watching. I threw my phone across the van and curled up under the blankets, forcing my eyes shut. In the silence I heard something outside, my own voice. "Claire, let me in." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. "Claire, I'm cold." I squeezed my eyes shut. The voice grew fainter, further away. Then, just before dawn, a text message from my own number. "Let me in." I packed up at first light. The van wouldn't start. The engine, the battery, everything was fine. It just wouldn't turn over. Like the forest had made up its mind. I wasn't leaving. I ran. I grabbed my pack and bolted down the dirt road, my breath coming fast and ragged. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to move. Then I saw her, ahead of me. She was standing in the middle of the road, waiting. She was me. Same clothes, same face, same eyes. She smiled. And I felt it, like something inside me was pulling, unraveling. Like she was taking something I didn't know I was losing. I turned and ran the other way. The road looped. I ended up right back at my van. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking. The sun was setting again, and I was afraid to close my eyes. That was when I saw the notebook, mine, lying open on the dashboard. The pages were filled with my handwriting, but I hadn't written them. They weren't words, just one sentence. Over and over, I am MCLA. My hands went numb. I heard the knocking again, soft, gentle, a whisper right against the door. "It's okay now, you can let go." I clenched my teeth, shook my head. The whisper became a laugh, a soft, breathy giggle, like she knew something I didn't. The world went black. When I woke up, I was outside, lying in the dirt, barefoot. My footprints led back to the van, but I didn't remember walking. I got up slowly, my head pounding. Something felt wrong. I checked my reflection in the van's side mirror. It moved a second too late, and it was still smiling. I don't remember how I got out. I must have walked. A trucker found me on the side of the road, dazed, covered in dirt. I told him I was lost, that my van had broken down. He drove me to the nearest town. I never went back. But sometimes, when I take a picture, I see something in the background, a shadow, a figure, a woman, wearing my clothes, smiling. I've always found that the desert has a way of clearing the mind. Vast stretches of nothingness can do wonders for perspective. Back in 2019, I was on assignment in the Sahara near the Algerian border. My name is Kelly Miller, and after 11 years as a Green Beret, I thought I'd seen just about everything. Our mission was straightforward: locate and secure a missing UN convoy that had vanished without a trace. I was teamed up with 3 others: Daniel Ortiz, a guy who could fix anything with a motor; Ahmed Elad, our local guide with a knack for navigating sandstorms; and Lisa Chin, the sharpest analyst I'd ever met, who had a habit of cracking one-liners at the worst possible times. As we set out across the dunes in our rugged jeeps, the sun beat down like it was trying to make a point. Ahmed was at the wheel, humming a tune I didn't recognize. "What's that song?" I asked. "Just something my grandfather used to sing." He replied with a grin, supposed to ward off evil spirits. "Well, keep singing," Lisa chimed in. "Can't hurt, right?" Daniel smirked. "If it keeps the sand out of the engine, I'm all for it." We drove for hours, the GPS flickering intermittently as if unsure of itself. The desert can mess with your instruments, but this felt different, erratic. "Equipment's acting up," Lisa noted, tapping the screen. "Maybe it's the evil spirits," Daniel joked. "Very funny," Ahmed said, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. As dusk approached, we stumbled upon the remnants of the convoy, Trucks were overturned, supplies scattered, and there was no sign of the personnel. "This doesn't look like an ambush," I observed. "No bullet holes," Lisa agreed. "No shell casings either." Daniel knelt beside one of the trucks. Engine still warm. Whatever happened, it was recent. Ahmed scanned the horizon. "We should be careful. The desert has its secrets." "Great! More secrets," Lisa muttered. "Just what we need." We split up to search the area. I headed toward a nearby rock formation. Something about it seemed out of place in the otherwise flat landscape. As I approached, I noticed markings on the stone, scratches forming an almost deliberate pattern. "Hey, take a look at this," I called out. The others joined me. Ahmed's face went pale. "We should leave, now." "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "These symbols, they're warnings in local folklore." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Warnings about what?" Before Ahmed could answer, a distant sound cut through the silence, a low, haunting howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Desert wolves?" Lisa suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Not like any wolf I've heard," Daniel replied. Night was closing in fast, and the temperature began to drop. We decided to make camp, but agreed to keep a constant watch. Something didn't feel right. Around midnight, as I sat poking at the dying embers of our fire, I heard rustling from behind the rocks. "Who's there?" I demanded, standing up. No response, just the wind, I told myself. Then I saw it, a silhouette moving swiftly between the dunes. It was large, moving on all fours, but disturbingly fluid, almost graceful. I alerted the others. "We're not alone out here." Lisa grabbed her rifle. "Animal or human?" "Not sure," I admitted. Ahmed whispered something under his breath, clutching a small talisman around his neck. "Any chance your amulet can scare it off?" Daniel asked, only half joking. Ahmed didn't answer. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the night. It was coming from the direction of our vehicles. We raced over to find one of the UN drivers whom we hadn't seen earlier, collapsing to the ground. Deep gashes crisscrossed his back, and his eyes were wide with terror. "Help me," he gasped. Lisa and I tried to administer first aid while Daniel and Ahmed stood guard. The man's wounds were severe, and despite our efforts, he slipped away within minutes. "What could have done this?" Lisa asked, her hands shaking. As if in response, the haunting howl echoed once more, closer this time. "We need to get out of here," Ahmed urged. "Agreed," I said, "but we're not leaving without answers." We decided to head back to the rock formation, thinking maybe there was a cave or shelter we could use. As we approached, the sand beneath our feet seemed to shift unnaturally. "Quicksand," Daniel wondered aloud. "No, it's solid ground," Ahmed insisted. Just then the creature emerged. A monstrous figure, like a hyena stretched to twice its normal size, with matted fur and a jaw that seemed to unhinge unnaturally. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, giving them an eerie glow. "Open fire!" I ordered. We unloaded our weapons, but the creature was fast, darting between rocks and making itself a difficult target. It let out a guttural snarl, a sound that vibrated through the air and rattled my bones. "Circle around," I directed, trying to flank it. Daniel moved to the right, but the creature anticipated the maneuver. In a blur of motion, it lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. "Get off me!" Daniel shouted, struggling to fend it off. Lisa took aim and fired a precise shot that grazed the creature's side, causing it to recoil. Ahmed rushed in, pulling Daniel to safety. "Thanks," Daniel panted, his face pale. The creature paced around us, seemingly unfazed by the injury. "Any bright ideas?" Lisa asked, reloading her weapon. I recalled the few canisters we'd seen near the convoy wreckage. "We need to lead it back to the trucks." "You're thinking explosives?" Daniel guessed. "Exactly." We formed a loose formation, slowly retreating toward the convoy. The creature followed, its movements predatory but patient. As we reached the wreckage, I grabbed one of the fuel canisters and rigged it with a makeshift fuse using cloth and a flare. "Keep it distracted," I told the others. Ahmed shouted something in his native language, waving his arms. The creature turned its attention to him, snarling. "Hey, over here!" Daniel taunted. I lit the fuse and rolled the canister toward the creature. "Now!" We dove behind one of the overturned trucks just as the canister exploded. Flames erupted, illuminating the night and engulfing the creature. "Did we get it?" Lisa asked, peering over the edge. Through the flames, we saw the silhouette stumble and collapse. "Let's hope so," I said. Silence settled over the desert, interrupted only by the crackling of fire. "Well, that was a blast," Daniel quipped, attempting to lighten the mood. "Your jokes are as bad as your aim," Lisa retorted, though a faint smile crossed her lips. Ahmed remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the burning wreckage. "Think there are more of them?" I asked him. He shook his head slowly. "Legends speak of only one, a guardian of the sands, punishing those who trespass." "Great," Daniel sighed. "Next time, let's vacation in Iceland." As dawn broke, we gathered what supplies we could and prepared to head back. "What do we tell command?" Lisa wondered. I considered it. "We report the loss of the convoy and the driver. Cause of death? Wildlife attack." "That's one way to put it," Daniel agreed. Ahmed glanced at me. "Some things are better left unsaid." I nodded. "Let's keep this between us." We started the long drive back. The rising sun cast long shadows across the dunes. The radio crackled to life with static, and for once it was a comforting sound. "At least the equipment's working again," Lisa remarked. "Silver linings," Daniel added. As we reached the outskirts of the desert, I took one last look at the endless sea of sand. "What's on your mind?" Ahmed asked. "Just thinking. I might stick to forests from now on," I replied. He chuckled softly. "Every place has its secrets." "Yeah, but at least trees don't usually try to eat me." "Depends on the forest," Lisa interjected. "Remind me to tell you about the time I was in the Amazon." On second thought, maybe city life wasn't so bad. On second thought, maybe city life isn't so bad, Daniel mused. We drove on, the tension easing with each mile. The desert had tested us, but we made it out, scarred but alive. Back at the base, debriefing was mercifully brief. The higher-ups seemed content with our report, attributing the losses to known hazards. As we parted ways, Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. "Next mission, let's lobby for beachfront duty." "Only if you promise not to attract any monsters," I shot back. "No guarantees," he laughed. Lisa headed toward the comms room. "I've got reports to file. Try not to get into trouble without me." Ahmed gave a small wave. "Until next time." I watched them go, grateful for a team that could face the unexplainable and still crack a joke afterward. Maybe the desert wouldn't make my list of vacation spots, but at least I'd have an interesting story if I ever ran out of things to say at a dinner party. My name is Timothy Perez. I was 31 years old when it happened. I don't tell this story because I want to. I tell it because I need to. People need to know what's out there, what's hiding in the places the maps call wild and empty. I used to think nothing scared me. I don't think that anymore. It was supposed to be a week-long RV trip through Florida's backwoods. Just me, my girlfriend Lisa, my best friend Tommy, and his buddy Trevor. We had planned it for months, an escape from the city, from our jobs, from reality. Tate's Hell State Forest sounded perfect. Isolated, beautiful, untouched. A little too untouched, as we would soon learn. The trouble started before we even reached our campsite. We were deep in the forest when the RV jolted violently, throwing Lisa against the window. The sound of crunching metal and hissing air followed. I slammed on the brakes. "What the hell was that?" Tommy asked, his hands gripping the dashboard. I jumped out to check. The front tire was shredded, destroyed by a row of rusted nails hidden beneath a layer of leaves and mud. Someone had put them there. "This isn't normal," Lisa muttered, standing beside me. Her auburn hair clung to her face in the humid air, her green eyes scanning the trees like they were watching her back. Who the hell booby-traps a road? Poachers, Tommy guessed. Or just some wanting to mess with tourists. Trevor, the quietest of us, crouched near the tire. "We're stuck." He wasn't wrong. We had no cell service, no spare, and no way to call for help. The nearest ranger station was a long, miserable hike away. I suggested we camp for the night and figure it out in the morning. Everyone agreed, though Lisa looked uneasy. That night, things got worse. It started with the noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees, but it wasn't. I heard whispers, low-cut, breathy voices. Laughter, the kind of laughter that didn't belong. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, gripping my arm. "Yeah," I admitted. Tommy unzipped the tent. "The hell is out there?" Trevor was already up, staring into the darkness. "Footsteps," he murmured, "barefoot. We found the prints in the morning. Large, human, but wrong, too long, too narrow, like someone had been walking on the edges of their feet. They circled our campsite, never coming closer than a few yards. Then we found the doll. It was sitting on a log near the fire pit, a small, crude thing made of sticks and twine, its mouth sewn shut with what looked like human hair. Lisa refused to touch it. "No, no, this is some Blair Witch." Trevor picked it up, inspecting the dark stains on its arms. Dried blood. We should have left then, but we didn't. We were arrogant. We thought we could handle it. That afternoon, Trevor went missing. He said he was going to take a leak and never came back. At first, we laughed it off, thinking he was messing with us. But when an hour passed, we started searching. We found his flashlight lying in the dirt, the lens cracked. His footprints stopped suddenly, like he had been lifted off the ground. Lisa wanted to leave. Tommy agreed. I told them we had to find Trevor first, and then he came back. It was just before sunset when he walked into camp. His clothes were dirty, his face blank. "Jesus, Trevor, where the hell have you been?" I demanded. "Got lost," he said. His voice was flat. "Wrong." Lisa grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's not Trevor." I shouldn't have. That night I woke up to whispering. I rolled over and saw Trevor sitting outside the tent, his back to me, mumbling to something I couldn't see. "Trevor?" He turned his head slightly, but not all the way. "Go back to sleep." I didn't. In the morning, Lisa pulled me aside. "Something's wrong with him, Timothy." "Yeah," I admitted. "But what do we do?" "We leave, now." Before we could, Tommy went missing. We searched all day, shouting his name, finding nothing but broken branches and deep, sunken footprints leading into the swamp. "He's gone," Lisa whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Then we heard the scream. It was distant but unmistakable. Tommy. He was alive. He was in trouble. Trevor turned to us, grinning for the first time in days. We should go after him. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. Still, I grabbed a knife and a flashlight, and Lisa followed. We ran toward the sound, deeper into the forest. The air grew thick with the stench of rot. Then we saw the pit. It was a deep hole, lined with sharpened sticks. Bones littered the bottom, human bones. And Tommy was there, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Jesus! I jumped down, cutting the ropes around his wrists. "Who did this to you?" Before he could answer, something hit me. Hard. When I came to, Lisa was screaming. I was tied to a wooden post, my arms wrenched behind my back. Firelight flickered, revealing figures moving through the trees. Thin, half-naked men and women with hollow eyes and sharpened teeth. They grinned at me, their mouths smeared with blood. Cannibals. And standing among them, smiling like he belonged, was Trevor. "Trevor," I croaked. He crouched beside me. "You shouldn't have come looking for Tommy." I struggled, but the ropes were too tight. Lisa was tied next to me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You were always the hero," Trevor whispered. "Always the one everyone looked up to. But out here, you're nothing." I spat at him. "You're insane." He wiped his face and smirked. "You'll see, soon enough." The cult leader approached, his face covered in scars. He muttered something in a language I didn't recognize, then pointed at Lisa. 2 men grabbed her. She screamed. I thrashed against my restraints. "No! Take me instead!" Trevor leaned in. "That's not how this works." I did the only thing I could. I bit down on the rope, sawing at it with my teeth. The fibers tore against my tongue. Then I heard Lisa cry out in pain. I snapped. With a final yank, the rope gave. I ripped my arms free and grabbed a burning log from the fire. I swung it into the nearest cannibal's face, the heat peeling skin from bone. Lisa kicked the man holding her. I grabbed a knife from the ground and cut her loose. Then we ran. The cult screamed behind us, their footsteps slamming against the dirt. I didn't look back. Somewhere in the chaos, Trevor shouted, "Timothy, wait!" I turned and saw him standing at the tree line, his face twisted in something like regret. "Please," he begged, "I didn't want this." Lisa raised the knife. I hesitated. Then I saw his smile flicker back. I stabbed him in the throat. We found the road just as a truck came around the bend. The driver nearly crashed trying to avoid us. We never spoke to the police. There was nothing to find, no evidence, no bodies, only nightmares. And sometimes late at night I think about Trevor, and I wonder if I really killed him. My name is Bobby Stevens, and this happened to me back in 2004 in Juneau, Alaska, when I thought I'd figured out the best way to escape the chaos of city life, buy a cabin off the grid, live like Thoreau, and grow an impressive beard. Turns out I'm not exactly a survivalist, and that beard never really came in. I'd been living in that cabin for about 2 months, wrestling with basic tasks like chopping wood without chopping my foot and getting a fire started without fumbling through half a box of matches. But I liked the solitude until I started hearing the hum. It wasn't every night, just sporadically, a low mechanical thrum that vibrated in my chest like a subwoofer cranked too high. At first, I thought it might be the wind against the peaks, or some kind of machinery echoing from the city miles away. I even made a joke to myself. Maybe Sasquatch got a generator. That night, though, the hum became a roar. My cabin shook, not like an earthquake, but more like the structure itself was resonating. I stumbled outside, bare feet crunching on the frosty gravel, and that's when I saw it. Hovering over the tree line was something enormous, metallic, and if I'm being honest, uglier than anything I'd ever imagined could fly. It wasn't sleek or aerodynamic, just a mass of haphazardly connected shapes, glowing what looked like molten gold veins running through their hulls. It didn't zip or glide, it hovered, pulsating as if deciding what to do next. And then it chose. A beam of light blasted down, not the kind that sweeps around like in old sci-fi movies, but sharp, focused, and immediate. Before I could duck or even think, I was in it, lifted clean off the ground like a rag doll. My first thought wasn't alien abduction. It was, this is the worst way to die. Barefoot. The next thing I knew, I was inside. It smelled sterile, but not in a hospital way, more like someone had scrubbed everything with ammonia and forgot to rinse. The walls pulsed faintly, that same molten glow I'd seen outside tracing patterns that seemed to shift the more I stared. I wasn't alone. There were 2 of them. The closest alien stood about 8 and 2, shaped like someone had stretched a human silhouette until it was all wrong. Thin as a rake, its limbs too long, with elbows that bent backward like a praying mantis. Its skin was textured like polished onyx, shimmering faintly under the light. The face, or what I assumed was the face, had no features, just smooth blackness. It looked at me, or at least turned toward me, and a voice filled my head, clear as if someone was speaking directly into my brain. "Do not be alarmed. You are unharmed." "Yeah, I can see that," I blurted. Sarcasm apparently is my default even under threat of dissection. Nothing says unharmed like yanking someone out of their yard without consent. The alien tilted its head, almost like a dog hearing a strange noise, then spoke again. "You are a sample. Analysis is required." "Sample? Buddy, I'm not an Amazon return." The other alien, slightly shorter but bulkier, with limbs like an insect's exoskeleton, approached, carrying something that looked a lot like a scalpel. If scalpels came in 3 parts and vibrated, it didn't even try for pleasantries. It pressed the blade to my shoulder and I howled, not in pain, at least not physical, but in a sound that ripped through my thoughts. They weren't cutting my flesh. They were cutting into my mind. Images flashed, moments I barely remembered. A spelling bee I won in 3rd grade. My first failed attempt to ask someone to prom. The time I accidentally set the toaster on fire trying to melt marshmallows. Each memory felt like it was being yanked out, examined, then tossed aside. "Stop it!" I screamed, but my voice barely echoed in the chamber. The taller alien responded. "Your species' resilience is sufficient. behavioral anomalies detected. Behavioral anomalies, I shouted. I cried during Homeward Bound. That doesn't make me an anomaly. The shorter alien finally spoke, or at least communicated, but its tone was harsher, angrier, like static interrupting a bad signal. You are defective. Others will replace. I didn't like the sound of replace. Before I could overthink it, I lunged, swiping at the shorter alien with pure, stupid adrenaline. My hand connected with its strange scalpel, sending it flying across the chamber. The taller alien responded instantly, extending its unnervingly long arms to pin me. Except I wasn't having it. I twisted, bringing one knee up into what I prayed was its weak spot. It crumpled slightly but didn't let go. You will not interfere, it declared, its voice pressing into my skull like a migraine. Yeah? Watch me, I spat. The chamber shifted suddenly, lurching sideways as if the entire ship had been struck. Alarms blared, a sound more grating than any fire drill I'd ever suffered. The shorter alien hissed something incomprehensible, rushing toward a panel covered in glowing symbols. That's when I spotted them. Cages. Lining the wall behind me were dozens of transparent containers, each filled with human bodies, limp but breathing. Some were kids, others elderly. Most somewhere in between. My stomach twisted. These weren't just samples. These were people. "Release them," I yelled, yanking against the taller alien's grip. It ignored me, focused on whatever crisis the ship was facing. The moment its grip slackened, I bolted toward the cages, searching for any way to open them. My hands fumbled against a panel covered in alien symbols, slapping buttons wildly. I must have hit the right one, because the cages hissed open and bodies started sliding out, like they'd been spit up by the machine. Not all of them woke up. The ones that did stared at me, their eyes wide and unfocused, as if their minds hadn't fully reconnected to their bodies. One man, a middle-aged guy with a scraggly beard, grabbed my arm and muttered, "Where? What?" "No time," I barked. "We're getting out of here." The shorter alien screeched, a sound so high-pitched it felt like my skull might split. It lunged toward us, but this time I was ready. Grabbing the closest thing I could, a chunk of metallic tubing, I swung it with everything I had. The impact sent the alien staggering backward, black ichor dripping from what I assumed was its arm. "Move," I shouted, shoving the freed captives toward what looked like an exit. The taller alien intercepted us, its limbs extending unnaturally to block the path. The shorter one was recovering, its vibrating blade back in hand. Desperation kicked in. I didn't have a plan. Just raw panic and the kind of reckless courage that comes from having absolutely nothing to lose. I hurled the tubing at the taller alien, then dove toward the control panel where the shorter one had been working. Symbols glowed and flickered, and I jabbed at them, praying I wasn't about to blow us all to smithereens. The ship jolted violently, tilting us sideways. The shorter alien screeched again, its blades skittering across the floor. One of the freed captives, a wiry teenager, grabbed the weapon and drove it into the alien's chest. Black liquid sprayed. The creature collapsed, twitching. "Gross," the kid muttered, tossing the blade aside. The taller alien turned toward the chaos, momentarily distracted. I seized the chance, slamming another button on the panel. A hatch opened behind us, revealing a tunnel of blinding white light. "Run!" I screamed. We dove through, one by one, tumbling onto cold, rocky ground. Behind us, the ship shuddered, emitting a deafening hum before it shot skyward, vanishing into the night. We weren't alone. Bodies littered the forest clearing, some mangled beyond recognition, others eerily pristine. The survivors stared in stunned silence, the weight of what we had just escaped sinking in. Later, investigators swarmed the area, documenting the carnage. Autopsies revealed surgical scars and strange metallic implants in the deceased. Authorities claimed it was a cult gone wrong, a mass delusion fueled by hysteria. They didn't believe us. But I saw the symbols, the cages, the ichor-stained blade. And I know this, whatever those things were, they weren't done collecting. I decided to take a trip to the Ozarks. I'd heard about the stunning views and serene lakes. and it sounded like the perfect escape from the grind. So I packed up my old RV and set off. My buddy Randy, who I'd known since college, decided to tag along. He's the kind of guy who can make you laugh even when you're knee-deep in trouble, so I figured he'd be good company. We drove for hours, the landscape changing from the flat plains of Oklahoma to the rolling hills of Arkansas. We finally found a secluded spot near a small lake. It was perfect, quiet with a great view of the water. We set up camp, cracked open a couple of beers, and sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. It was late afternoon when we noticed the old man. He was wandering near the edge of our campsite, looking a bit lost. Randy waved him over. The old man introduced himself as Henry. He looked like he'd been through the ringer, clothes worn, eyes tired. He mentioned he lived alone in a cabin a few miles away and sometimes took walks to clear his mind. "You'll be careful out here," Henry said, his voice low and serious. "There's things in these woods that don't take kindly to strangers." Randy and I exchanged glances. It sounded like something straight out of a horror movie, but we just laughed it off. After all, what's a camping trip without a little local folklore? That night, as we settled into the RV, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves outside. Randy was already snoring when I heard it, a distant scream, sharp and cut off abruptly. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened. Silence. I shook it off, telling myself it was just an animal, and eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, we decided to hike to a nearby waterfall Henry had mentioned. It was a beautiful day, the sun filtering through the trees, the path winding through the dense forest. As we walked, Randy kept cracking jokes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every so often I'd glance over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. We reached the waterfall, and it was worth the hike. Crystal clear water cascaded over rocks, the mist cooling our faces. We spent a few hours there, just enjoying the peace. On the way back, though, things got weird. We found a clearing with what looked like an old campsite. It was abandoned. Tents torn and scattered, and there were dark stains on the ground. Randy poked around, and we found a backpack with a wallet inside. The ID belonged to a guy named Tom Miller, and it looked like it had been there for a while. "This is creepy, man," Randy said, his usual humor gone. "Yeah, let's get out of here," I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. We hurried back to our campsite, and the whole way I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. That night, we locked the RV doors and kept the fire burning. We didn't talk much, both of us on edge. Around midnight, I heard something moving outside. I peeked out the window and saw a shadowy figure moving between the trees. It was tall and moved with an eerie, unnatural grace. I shook Randy awake and pointed. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The figure disappeared. "We should leave," Randy whispered, fear in his voice. "Let's wait till morning," I said, not wanting to navigate the rough terrain in the dark. The night was restless. We took turns keeping watch, but nothing else happened. At first light, we packed up, ready to leave. As we were securing the last of our gear, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned to see Henry. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his face grim. "Saw what?" Randy replied, his voice shaky. "The creature. It's been around here for generations. No one knows what it is, but it's taken people. Good people," Henry said. "Why didn't you warn us?" I demanded, anger bubbling up. "Would you have believed me?" Henry shot back, "Just get out while you can." We didn't need any more convincing. We drove out of there as fast as the RV could handle, but as we rounded a bend, the RV sputtered and died. We were miles from the nearest town, no cell service, and it was getting dark. "Great, just great," Randy muttered. We grabbed our gear and started walking, hoping to find help. The forest was silent, too silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. After a while, we saw lights in the distance. It was a small cabin. Relieved, we hurried toward it and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman answered, her face etched with worry. "Please, can you help us?" I asked. "Our RV broke down." She hesitated, but then nodded. "Come in. I'm Emma. You can use the phone." We stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. As we dialed for a tow truck, Emma watched us closely. "You shouldn't be out here," she said quietly. "People have gone missing." "Yeah, we've heard," Randy said. "What's going on?" Emma sighed. "It's hard to explain. There's something in these woods, something that hunts." We didn't sleep much that night, and Emma insisted we stay until morning. At dawn, we set out to find our RV. Emma gave us a shotgun, just in case. The walk back was tense, every snap of a twig making us jump. When we finally reached the RV, it looked undisturbed. Randy tried the ignition and miraculously it started. We drove out of there, not looking back. We made it to the nearest town and got the RV checked. Nothing was wrong with it. We decided to cut the trip short and head home. As we drove, we couldn't shake the feeling that we barely escaped something terrible. Randy and I didn't talk much, both lost in our thoughts. A few weeks later, I saw a news report about a missing hiker in the Ozarks. The name sounded familiar. Tom Miller, the same name on the ID we found. My blood ran cold. I did some research and found that people had been disappearing in those woods for decades. The locals had a name for the creature, the Wanderer. No one knew what it was, but the stories were all the same. Something out there, something that watched and waited. I haven't been camping since. Randy and I don't talk about what happened, but sometimes I catch him looking over his shoulder and I know he's thinking about it too. It's hard to explain, but that trip changed us. There's a part of those woods that never left me, a shadow that follows me in my dreams. They say time heals all wounds, but some things leave scars that never fade. The Wanderer is still out there, and I can only hope it never finds me again. My name is Caleb Adams, and this happened to me on October 16th, 2013. I was never much of an outdoorsman, but my buddy Davis Hawkins was always trying to get me out of the city. "Just one weekend, Caleb," he'd say. "It'll do you good." So I finally caved in and bought myself a used RV. Davis and I planned a camping trip to the Ozarks, a place he swore by for its serenity and beauty. We arrived late on a Friday, the sun already dipping below the horizon. The spot was isolated, with thick trees hemming us in on all sides. There was a small clearing where we parked the RV, and Davis got to work setting up a fire while I unpacked. The first night was uneventful, filled with beer and stories about our college days. Saturday morning, Davis wanted to hike to a nearby stream he'd found on a previous trip. I was hesitant, preferring the comfort of the RV, but he convinced me. "It's just a short hike," he promised. We set off, the crisp autumn air invigorating. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. It was almost peaceful. We reached the stream by noon and spent a couple of hours fishing. Davis caught a couple of small trout, and I managed to tangle my line more than once. We started back in the early afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the trees. On our way back, we came across an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, but curiosity got the better of us. Davis wanted to check it out, and I, against my better judgment, followed him inside. The place was a wreck, with broken furniture and dust covering everything. In one corner, there was a pile of old newspapers and a rusted metal box. Davis pried it open, revealing a bunch of old photographs and a strange-looking amulet. "This is some creepy stuff," I said, trying to hide my unease. Davis just laughed, pocketing the amulet. "Relax, Caleb. It's just junk." We left the cabin and made our way back to the RV. That night, things started to get weird. We were sitting by the fire and Davis was fiddling with the amulet, turning it over in his hands. The firelight cast strange shadows, and for a moment it looked like the amulet was glowing. "Do you see that?" I asked, pointing at it. Davis shook his head. "You're seeing things." I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise outside had me on edge. I kept thinking about that cabin and the weird vibe it gave off. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to Davis shaking me. "Caleb, wake up! Do you hear that?" I listened. There was a low, steady hum coming from somewhere outside. "What the hell is that?" I muttered. rubbing my eyes. Davis looked as freaked out as I felt. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped outside, the cold night air hitting us like a slap. The hum was louder now and seemed to be coming from the direction of the cabin. "We should check it out," Davis said, his voice wavering. I wanted to tell him no, to pack up and leave, but something about the look in his eyes stopped me. We made our way through the forest, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The hum grew louder with each step, vibrating in my chest. When we reached the cabin, the door was ajar. The hum was almost deafening now, coming from inside. We stepped in, and the amulet Davis had left on the floor was glowing, pulsing with a strange, eerie light. "What the hell is that thing?" I asked, but Davis didn't answer. He was staring at the amulet, his face pale. Then something happened. The hum stopped, and for a moment there was complete silence. And then a sound like ripping fabric followed by a crash. Davis screamed, a sound I'll never forget, and he was gone. One moment he was standing next to me, and the next, he was just gone. I ran out of the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the RV. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I locked myself inside and sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called the local authorities, but when they arrived there was no sign of Davis or the cabin. The spot where it stood was just an empty clearing. They didn't believe me, thought I was drunk or hallucinating. They searched the area but found nothing. I drove back to the city in a daze. I tried to explain what had happened to Davis's family, but they looked at me like I was crazy. The official report listed Davis as missing, presumed dead. I couldn't shake the feeling that the amulet had something to do with it, but without any evidence, it was just my word against reality. Years passed, and the memory of that night still haunts me. I've tried to move on, but every now and then I hear that hum in the back of my mind. Sometimes I think about going back, trying to find the cabin again, but fear always stops me. I've read up on local folklore, trying to find any mention of an amulet or a cabin that matches what I saw. One name keeps coming up in old stories, a creature called MC. It's said to be a guardian of some kind, a protector of ancient relics. I can't be sure, but it's the only thing that makes any sense. I still have the RV, but I haven't gone camping since. I stick to the city now, where the noise of traffic drowns out the hum. But late at night, when everything is quiet, I sometimes hear it, and I remember Davis's scream and the look on his face. I've accepted that I'll never have all the answers. Some things are just beyond understanding, but I know what I experienced, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. Davis was my friend, and I wish I could have done something to save him. But whatever that thing was, it took him, and I'm not sure if it can be stopped. In the end, all I can do is tell the story and hope that someone out there believes me. Maybe they'll be smarter than we were, more cautious. And maybe, just maybe, they'll find a way to stop MC before it takes someone else.